Hey everyone, tonight we're descending into a silence that outlasted empires. Beneath the sands of Luxor's western valley, hidden under layers of wind and time, lies a tomb that no one had seen since the age of the pharaohs. For 4,000 years, it waited perfectly sealed, untouched by looters, unknown to history. And when it was finally opened, the world didn't just find another burial site. It found something that shouldn't exist. What began as a routine excavation in 2022 quickly became one of the most unsettling archaeological discoveries of the century. Instruments failed. Data vanished. The air itself seemed to hum. Inside, carvings appeared that defied linguistic order. Pigments reacted to light, and a strange low vibration, one beyond human hearing, pulsed steadily through the stone. Scientists called it coincidence. Others called it warning. Tonight, we'll follow the team who opened that tomb and everything that followed. We'll trace the discoveries that blurred the line between science and myth, the mirrored chambers, the impossible metals, the DNA that didn't belong, and the architect who may have sealed himself inside. So, as you settle in and the world outside grows quiet, imagine standing before a door that hasn't moved in 40 centuries. Imagine breaking it open and realizing the silence on the other side isn't empty at all, it's waiting. The tomb that waited for light. In 2022, deep beneath the dunes of Luxor's western valley, a sealed doorway was opened for the first time in 4 millennia. The air that escaped smelled of stone and age, like a whisper from before recorded memory. Archaeologists expected another minor burial. What they found instead would upend what Egyptologists believed about the Middle Kingdom's forgotten dead. The discovery began almost by chance. A Cairo University team was surveying a rocky ridge west of Deir el-Bahari, an area thought long, exhausted by excavation. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a perfect rectangle nearly 12 meters below the surface, its corners sharp, its alignment exact with the cardinal points. The void was too deliberate to be natural. Weeks of excavation followed. Under layers of compacted sand, they uncovered a narrow descending passage blocked by a single sandstone slab. It bore no names, no prayers, not even a maker's mark, an absence almost louder than words. Egyptian tombs always spoke, but this one remained silent. When the final grains were cleared away, the team gathered in the evening heat, cameras ready. As chisels tapped along the edges, the plug shifted slightly, releasing a sigh of trapped air. The temperature dropped several degrees. For a moment, even the desert wind seemed to pause. Inside stretched a narrow corridor, its limestone walls astonishingly smooth. No soot, no vandalism, no sign of intrusion. Dust floated in the lamplight like snow. At the far end, another blockage appeared, an inner seal of stone and gypsum, layered over the first. A door within a door. The phrase matched no known funerary text. Linguists placed its grammar between the Old and Middle Egyptian periods, a linguistic ghost from a turbulent age. When the second barrier broke, the light revealed a small burial hall untouched by time. In the center stood low, altars ringed with pottery jars sealed in pitch. To the north wall, painted in fading ochre, was the silhouette of a human figure beneath a divided sun, half golden, half black. The image was unlike anything in Egyptian art, neither funerary nor royal. Nearby, a wooden box had long since decayed, leaving only a scatter of gold dust in a shallow rectangular pit. There was no body, no sarcophagus, only an outline where something once rested. Carbon dating placed the chamber around 1870 BCE. Yet the artistic style looked centuries older. The past seemed layered inside itself, as though each generation had returned to strengthen the seal. Samples from the walls showed residues of resin and a fine crystalline film formed by extreme heat proof that the chamber had been subjected to temperatures over 200 degrees Celsius before closure. No ritual described in Egyptian texts required such burning. Others whispered of a symbolic fire, a purification of the ka meant to separate soul from matter. The find unsettled even seasoned Egyptologists. The inner room contained no theft marks, no damage, yet the absence of human remains implied removal or something stranger. Traces of mercury were found in the floor's cracks, an element used rarely and only in rites meant to bind the spirit. It appeared that whoever had been placed here was not meant to rest but to remain contained. In their notes, researchers described the atmosphere as peculiarly still. Microphones used to monitor vibration later captured a low-frequency tone, hovering between 18 and 20 Hz, the range where sound becomes physical pressure rather than noise. It persisted until the chamber was resealed each night. The readings stopped only when the inner doorway was blocked again. For the scientific report, the tone was listed simply as environmental anomaly. But among the workers, the story grew. They said the tomb had waited listening for 4,000 years, sealed against the light until the world was ready to remember what it had hidden. The door with no inscription. Unlike most tombs of its era, this one bore no royal cartouche, no names or prayers to guide the soul. The stone plug blocking its entrance was seamless, as if poured from the earth itself. Whoever sealed it intended it to stay closed forever. The outer passage leading to the doorway was narrow and steep, carved with such precision that the walls still reflected faint light after 4,000 years. Most tombs in the Western Valley bore signs of hurried craftsmanship, tool marks, chisel grooves, faint hieroglyphic etchings, but here the surface was flawless. It felt less built than grown, as though the limestone had formed naturally around the design. Even under the archaeologists' floodlights, no trace of pigment or plaster could be found. It was a door meant not to invite, but to repel. When Professor Karim and his team first examined it, they assumed it was a false door, a symbolic threshold common in Middle Kingdom burials. But the stone's density readings told another story. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a hollow chamber behind it, almost perfectly rectangular, its air cavity distinct from the surrounding rock. Whatever lay beyond was genuine, not ceremonial, yet the seal's craftsmanship was like nothing else in Egyptian archaeology. The joints were invisible. No gaps existed between the door and the frame. When tapped, it produced a low, resonant tone, the sound of something solid and deliberate. Attempts to date the material were equally baffling. The limestone matched quarries from the nearby cliffs, but its surface had been treated with a compound that resisted weathering. Under magnification, researchers found a thin coating of silica fused into the pores of the stone, a process that would require temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius. No known ancient technique could achieve this effect. The coating made the surface impermeable to air and moisture, explaining why the mortar beneath still held after 40 centuries. As work continued, the team grew increasingly cautious. Hieroglyphic fragments on surrounding rocks hinted that the site might predate the reign of Senusret II, perhaps reaching back into Egypt's dark interval, a time of droughts, famine, and social collapse. During that age, many tombs were deliberately erased, their inscriptions chiseled out to prevent the dead from returning. Yet even those defaced monuments bore traces of names. This one offered none. It was as if the individual entombed here had been removed not only from history, but from memory itself. When the seal was finally scored along its perimeter, the limestone released a faint hum, a vibration almost imperceptible to the ear but visible on audio monitors. Some described it as a breathing sound, a slow oscillation between frequencies. Technicians double-checked their equipment. There were no nearby generators, no buried cables. The sound came from the door itself. Late one evening, as workers rested, a technician noticed something unusual. Under angled torchlight, hairline ridges appeared across the door's surface, hundreds of parallel lines forming a spiral pattern too faint for the naked eye. When digitally enhanced, the spiral resembled a labyrinth, converging toward a small depression at the center. It wasn't decoration. It was a locking system. By inserting bronze pins into the grooves and applying pressure at specific points, the door began to shift. The mechanism moved with the weight of stone, yet the smoothness of metal. It took 2 days to release it safely. When the slab finally broke contact with its frame, the ground trembled slightly, not from collapse, but from change in air pressure. A sigh of trapped atmosphere escaped, carrying the dry scent of myrrh and resin. Inside, darkness absorbed the light. Dust motes hung motionless, as if even time had slowed within. Behind the doorway stretched a corridor only 2 meters long, ending in another barrier of polished basalt. Unlike the outer door, this second one bore faint carvings, a single circle split into halves, one bright, one shadowed. Beneath it, 3 symbols repeated over and over. Nepha, meaning perfect. Rek, meaning knowledge. And Sesh, meaning to write. Scholars debated whether this was an invocation or a warning. Perhaps the tomb's builder believed words themselves could awaken what was buried. The lack of inscriptions then was not neglect, but cautious silence chosen to contain something better left unspoken. When the team finally sealed the site for the night, the limestone door remained half open, leaning against its groove. In the still air, the faint hum continued for several minutes before fading. One researcher noted in his log, "It sounded like stone remembering the sound of its own closing. The door had kept its secret for 4,000 years. And now, for the first time, it was listening again. Echoes beneath the valley floor. Before a single tool struck stone, researchers used ground-penetrating radar to map the void. The data revealed not one chamber but 3 stacked vertically, like levels of a forgotten monument. The readings hinted at movement within subtle shifts caused by trapped air pockets or something else. The valley floor above the tomb was quiet that morning, the desert air heavy and still. To the untrained eye, there was nothing unusual about the landscape. A low ridge of pale limestone, scattered with wind-carved rocks and the bleached remains of ancient campsites. But below the surface, the radar images told a story of geometry and precision. The voids beneath were not random caves or collapsed tunnels. They were deliberate, aligned along a perfect vertical axis, each chamber separated by nearly identical layers of bedrock. At first, archaeologists assumed the readings reflected old structural collapse chambers, built at different times and later buried by sediment. The upper chamber's ceiling matched the floor of the middle one to within 5 centimeters. The lowest void, the deepest of the 3, produced the strongest signal, its outline pulsing faintly on the monitors as if responding to the radar sweep. When the team adjusted the frequency, the anomaly grew clearer. The densitometer registered slight fluctuations in the signal, tiny oscillations that didn't match any known geological interference. These weren't echoes from rock. They were temporal, repeating in perfect rhythmic intervals. The data suggested that something inside the lowest chamber was shifting pressure ever so slightly, as though breathing through the stone. Over the next days, the team mapped the site in meticulous grids. The chambers appeared to form a vertical complex, unlike any tomb previously recorded in Egypt. Traditional burials followed horizontal layouts, symbolic of the journey westward into the afterlife. But this design descending straight down through the earth mirrored a concept closer to a spiritual descent, a literal passage into the underworld. Each scan revealed details that deepened the mystery. The upper chamber showed faint traces of ornamentation, possibly carvings or niches, while the second seemed almost empty, a hollow buffer zone. The lowest, however, displayed irregular shapes along its floor, something between natural formations and man-made features. When the radar software translated these into topographic maps, the image looked like a spiral, a ramp curling inward, vanishing at the core. Professor Karim, overseeing the survey, compared the data to texts from the Coffin of Ani and the Amduat. both describing the soul's journey through 12 gates of darkness. But here, there were only 3, perhaps an early prototype of that myth. Rendered in stone rather than scripture. On the 7th night of scanning, technicians working the monitors reported faint acoustic interference. Their instruments, designed to pick up microseismic vibrations, detected a recurring tone between 18 and 22 Hz below the threshold of human hearing. It came in pulses, regular and deliberate. For hours, it continued, fading and returning, perfectly synchronized with the radar's rotation. At first, they blamed equipment feedback. But when all systems were powered down, the signal persisted for nearly 3 minutes before vanishing. Later, when they replayed the recording at 20 times speed, the pulses formed a pattern unmistakably structured 3 long tones. 3 short, 3 long. A code, perhaps accidental, perhaps ancient. The next morning, excavation began at the precise point above the uppermost void. The first strikes of the pickaxes echoed with an uncanny clarity, travelling through the limestone as if the rock were hollow. One geologist remarked that it sounded alive, the way a great drum resonates when struck. Each vibration returned slightly delayed, layered upon itself like an echo bouncing between unseen corridors. By midday, the workers reached the crown of the upper chamber. A small cavity opened, exhaling a gust of cold, dry air. When microphones were lowered into the space, they captured faint reverberations continuing long after each sound had stopped. It was as though the valley itself was whispering from beneath an echo older than the language of men. That night, the research camp stayed awake, replaying the recordings. Every frequency, every delay, seemed intentional. And when one technician isolated the background noise from the main signal, the waveform revealed a slow, rhythmic oscillation. The same breathing pattern first detected in the radar scans. It wasn't geological pressure, and it wasn't the wind. Something deep below the valley floor was still moving softly, patiently, as it had for 4,000 years. The Guardian's face. Inside the entrance passage lay a single statue, a human figure kneeling, palms upward, eyes carved from obsidian. Its gaze was fixed on the newly broken seal, as if waiting for this exact intrusion. For a long moment, no one spoke. The floodlights caught the glint of those black eyes, reflecting the movement of the team as though the stone figure were alive. The body was carved from limestone but burnished smooth, its surface unusually intact despite the centuries. The statue's expression was neither hostile nor serene. It was expectant, poised between warning and welcome. Its hands, cupped as if to hold water, were dusted with a faint residue of copper oxide that shimmered under the lights. Measurements revealed that the statue stood just under 1 meter tall, positioned precisely at the midpoint of the corridor. Its symmetry was perfect, too perfect to be purely symbolic. When ground sensors were placed around its base, they detected a metallic signature beneath the limestone floor. The team decided not to move the statue yet. In archaeology, disturbance could destroy context. Instead, they scanned it with portable LiDAR, revealing intricate carvings on its back concentric spirals surrounded by tiny marks resembling stars. At first, these seemed decorative. But Egyptologist Dr. Hassan noted a strange detail. The spirals matched constellations known only to later dynasties: Orion, Canis Major, and the Southern Cross. The precision implied astronomical knowledge predating its supposed era by at least 1,000 years. The Guardian, it seemed, did not merely mark an entrance. It encoded the sky. Closer inspection deepened the mystery. The obsidian eyes were not separate stones but fused seamlessly into the sockets, as though melted into place. Under magnification, the transition between limestone and glassy mineral was molecularly bonded, impossible with ancient tools. When a beam of light struck the left eye, it refracted into a narrow point along the floor, landing precisely on a section of wall that had been painted centuries ago and since faded to near invisibility. Under ultraviolet light, faint symbols emerged. 3 vertical lines and a crescent, followed by the phrase, "He watches for dawn." That discovery changed the interpretation entirely. The statue was not a mere guardian, it was a sentinel designed to react to light. At sunrise, the first rays entering through the outer corridor would strike its obsidian eyes and redirect onto the inner wall, an optical alarm activated by daylight after thousands of years. When computer models simulated the sun's angle on the morning of the equinox, the beam aligned perfectly with the tomb's central axis. It was a system of light and shadow, both ritual and mechanical, suggesting a blend of astronomy and spiritual engineering long before such knowledge was thought to exist. Later that evening, as the excavation continued, an audio technician monitoring vibration sensors reported a faint pattern of rhythmic pulses emanating from the statue's base, one every 6 seconds. The signal was too regular to be natural but too faint to be mechanical. Some suspected microfractures resonating from shifting air pressure. Others weren't so sure. When playback was slowed, the pattern resembled a heartbeat. The team considered lifting the statue, but Professor Karim refused. "Nothing moves until we understand its function," he said. This was placed to watch, not to be watched. Over the next few days, environmental readings around the figure showed another peculiarity. The temperature in the passage remained constant at 16 degrees Celsius, while the air outside fluctuated widely. The stone seemed to regulate its own microclimate, creating a small zone of stability, a literal calm at the threshold. One night, during a brief sandstorm, the floodlights flickered out. In the seconds of darkness that followed, one worker swore he saw a faint glow from within the obsidian eyes, not bright, but enough to leave an afterimage. He said nothing until morning, when the team reviewed footage from the thermal cameras. There, faint and undeniable, the statue's head radiated a temperature 2 degrees warmer than the surrounding air. Skeptics blamed residual heat from the lighting, yet when measured again hours later, the warmth persisted, concentrated only around the eyes. The rest of the stone remained cold. The discovery log closed that night with a line written by Dr. Hassan. "It watches for dawn, even when dawn does not come." The Guardian's face had survived empires, floods, and time itself, patient, unblinking, and ready. Whatever purpose it once served, it had done so flawlessly. For 4,000 years, it waited in silence, and now, at last, it was awake again. Script in the dark. On the walls were symbols that defied the expected hieroglyphic order. Lines spiraled inward rather than downward, forming a pattern that radiocarbon dating would later trace to a pre-dynastic style thought extinct centuries earlier. The discovery came just hours after the Guardian statue was found. When floodlights swept across the interior passage, the walls appeared smooth at first glance, bare limestone, untouched by chisel or paint. But as the air settled and fine dust lifted away, faint carvings revealed themselves in a slow, spectral shimmer. They were shallow, almost invisible, arranged in circular bands that coiled toward a single central point like a whirlpool. No one on the team recognized the layout. Egyptian writing was meant to be read in columns or rows, never in spirals. To make sense of the pattern, researchers traced each groove by hand, photographing the surface under raking light. What emerged was not ordinary script, but something older, almost proto-linguistic. The signs resembled early hieroglyphs found in the Abydos tombs, yet their sequence made no grammatical sense. Linguist Dr. Leila Mansour noted that several symbols appeared reversed mirror images of known glyphs, as though written for a reader standing inside the wall itself. Chemical analysis of the pigment residue deepened the mystery. It wasn't ochre, charcoal, or hematite, the usual palette of Egyptian artists. The carvings had been filled with a black metallic compound containing trace elements of antimony and copper. Under infrared light, the substance glowed faintly blue, forming a web of connected lines that pulsed under alternating frequencies. Some suggested it was decorative, others believed it served a purpose, perhaps conducting static charge through the limestone. One evening, while scanning the chamber, a technician noticed something extraordinary. When the lights were dimmed and the generator's hum subsided, a faint phosphorescent glow lingered in the carvings. Not bright, but unmistakable. It rippled slowly along the spiral, fading toward the center. The glow lasted only a few seconds before vanishing entirely. No one could explain it. The pigment, tested under controlled light, showed no luminescent properties. It was as though the wall itself had stored and released energy, like the slow exhale of a memory. Archaeologists began calling it the living text. When digitally mapped, the spirals aligned perfectly with magnetic readings taken earlier in the tomb. The outermost ring matched the site's north-south axis, while the innermost point corresponded to a small cavity behind the wall, a hollow only a few centimeters wide, sealed since antiquity. Dr. Mansour suggested it might contain a copper insert or amulet, placed to anchor the design's spiritual geometry. Others wondered if it was a burial of words, a message physically entombed within the stone. When sound tests were conducted, the passage revealed yet another anomaly. A single clap of the hands produced a resonant echo, lasting nearly 9 seconds. The tone seemed to rotate, spiraling through the space before fading. Acoustic engineers theorized that the carved grooves acted as diffusers, shaping sound waves into a vortex. In ancient Egypt, sound was not merely art, it was ritual. Priests believed certain tones could awaken gods or seal them in silence. Perhaps the script wasn't meant to be read, but heard. The deeper they analyzed, the more contradictions appeared. Radiocarbon dating of soot trapped in the engravings placed their origin around 3,200 BCE, centuries before the unification of Egypt. Yet stylistically, some glyphs referenced deities that wouldn't emerge for another 1,000 years. It was as if multiple timelines had converged on these walls, compressing Egypt's evolving language into a single, impossible text. During one late-night study session, the team used ultraviolet light to highlight minor imperfections. To their astonishment, several symbols shifted color, turning from deep black to vivid green under certain angles. Doctor. Mansour noticed the change formed a new word when viewed from above Sekhem, meaning power. Beneath it, another pattern spelled Rek, meaning to know. The combination Sekhem-Rek was archaic but familiar. The power to know. The phrase was carved directly opposite the entrance, facing whoever stood in the tomb's heart. It was the only legible sentence in the entire chamber. Some called it coincidence, others an invocation. As dawn broke the next morning, the desert's first light filtered through the corridor, striking the spiral text. For a moment, the grooves seemed to shimmer again, like ink still drying after 4,000 years. The spiral pulsed once, faintly, and went dark. The data log for that morning closed with a note from Dr. Mansour. The writing is not meant to be seen. It listens, it waits, perhaps it remembers. And beneath the sand-swept valley, the script in the dark remained silent once more, its meaning preserved, its voice unspoken, waiting for the next vibration strong enough to wake it. Chamber of resonant silence. The main burial chamber was perfectly intact. No looters, no footprints. In the center stood a black sarcophagus coated with hardened pitch. Instruments recorded an unusual magnetic reading surrounding the coffin, faint but constant. For a site buried 4,000 years beneath shifting sand, such preservation bordered on the miraculous. The floor was dustless, its limestone tiles polished like glass. Even the air seemed unnaturally still, thick with the faint sweetness of resin and the ghost of myrrh. Archaeologists entered one by one, their footsteps echoing in a room that had not known sound since the Bronze Age. The silence was so complete it felt physical, pressing on the eardrums like deep water. The sarcophagus dominated the center of the space. Nearly 3 meters long, it rested on a platform, carved directly from the bedrock. Its black coating, when examined, proved to be a complex mixture of bitumen, resin, and what appeared to be pine sap, a combination unknown in Egyptian embalming of the period. The outer surface had hardened into a glossy crust that reflected light like obsidian. What puzzled the team most was the magnetic anomaly. A portable magnetometer detected a steady field, hovering around 8 microteslas above the ambient reading, too weak to harm equipment, yet too consistent to dismiss as error. When the instrument was moved around the coffin, the field formed a pattern, a perfect oval extending outward, mirroring the sarcophagus's shape. Doctor, Karim suggested the resin contained traces of iron oxide, perhaps from the pigment used in ancient paints. But chemical tests revealed none. The magnetic field, faint but measurable, had no clear source. Under infrared imaging, the coffin's surface revealed dozens of circular impressions, fingerprints, pressed deep into the resin before it had hardened. They were not random. Each one occurred at precise intervals, creating a sequence that spiraled around the lid. Some were small, others broad and elongated, as if made by different individuals working in ritual order. The pattern was unlike any known burial practice. It seemed less about sealing a body and more about marking a boundary. When the lid was examined more closely, small air bubbles trapped beneath the surface suggested the resin had been poured in layers, each allowed to set before the next was added. The process would have taken weeks, perhaps months. Whoever performed it was not preserving a body in haste. They were building something entombing not just flesh, but energy, intention, and fear. On the northern wall, researchers found narrow recesses filled with dried resin drips, each one hardened mid-flow like frozen tears. The smell was stronger there, sharp and almost metallic. Behind the wall, sensors detected a thin cavity running parallel to the chamber, filled with compacted sediment. When a fiber optic camera was inserted through a crack, it revealed something unexpected. Dozens of small clay figurines arranged in rows, each facing the sarcophagus. Their arms were crossed, their faces expressionless. The figures' eyes had been painted black with manganese pigment. Every one of them stared toward the coffin. The magnetic reading intensified slightly when the camera approached the cavity, rising by 0.5 microtesla. The change was too precise to be random. "They built the wall around it," Dr. Karim whispered. "These are not offerings, they're witnesses." At 2:40 the following morning, while the chamber was being scanned, the magnetometer abruptly spiked the field, doubling for exactly 30 seconds before returning to baseline. No equipment was active, and no movement had been recorded. The data log captured the event as localized magnetic surge source unknown. In the silence that followed, several members reported hearing a faint clicking sound, like resin contracting after heat, but the temperature remained steady at 16 degrees Celsius. Later analysis confirmed the sound did not originate from any known mechanical source. The clicks came from within the sarcophagus itself, though the lid had never been opened. By dawn, the readings stabilized, but the feeling within the room did not. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm. No one spoke of it directly, yet every log entry from that morning used the same word, pressure. Not metaphorical pressure, but the sense of something invisible pushing back. When the day ended, the lights were dimmed and the chamber sealed once again. The instruments continued to record faint electromagnetic fluctuations long into the night, rhythmic, steady, unyielding. It was as if the black sarcophagus, encased in resin and silence, was still performing its ancient purpose, holding something in place. Not just a body, but the memory of an act so deliberate that even time had learned not to disturb it. The sound that shouldn't exist. As archaeologists documented the room, an ultrasonic microphone picked up a low resonance between 18 and 20 Hz below human hearing. It pulsed in intervals matching a human heartbeat. At first, the team thought it was equipment noise, the faint hum of generators or vibration from air compressors outside the tomb. But when they shut everything down, the pulse continued. The sound wasn't coming from the tools, or even the walls. It was coming from the air itself, faint, steady, and disturbingly organic. The waveform appeared simple but unnerving. Every 9 seconds, a subtle spike rippled through the sensors, perfectly regular. Infrasound at that frequency is almost never produced naturally underground. It can be caused by tectonic stress, volcanic gas flow, or artificial vibration, but Luxor's bedrock is geologically quiet. The signal had a rhythm too precise for chance, too gentle for machinery. "It's like the chamber is breathing," said Dr. Karim quietly as the first spectrograms appeared on the laptop screen. The longer they listened, the stranger it grew. Though inaudible to human ears, prolonged exposure to infrasound has physical effects, a feeling of unease, pressure in the chest, and the illusion of movement in the corners of vision. Within minutes, several team members began reporting those sensations. One described feeling as though her heartbeat was being subtly mirrored by the sound. Another said it felt like standing next to a sleeping animal, vast and slow. To confirm, the team deployed a second array of microphones along the chamber floor, calibrated to isolate vibrations from the limestone itself. When the data came in, it revealed something remarkable. The pulse was not uniform. It originated from the exact center of the room directly beneath the black sarcophagus. The amplitude of the signal was weak, barely measurable, but its persistence defied explanation. It remained constant day and night, unchanging in strength or tempo. On the third day, technicians noted a second frequency emerging faintly above the first, this one at 38 Hz, the harmonic double of the original tone. The two waves formed a natural resonance that amplified at precise intervals, producing a soft oscillation pattern that rolled through the chamber like invisible tides. When visualized, the waveform formed a perfect standing wave pattern, the kind seen when sound is trapped within a confined cavity. In essence, the tomb was acting as an enormous resonator, but resonating with what? No external source existed. No mechanical origin could sustain such a tone. It seemed to emerge from the tomb itself, from the void it enclosed. Acoustic engineers suggested that temperature gradients between the resin-coated sarcophagus and the cooler stone walls might produce vibration as the air expanded and contracted. Yet, that theory failed to explain the rhythmic precision. The temperature data showed no corresponding fluctuations. Whatever was producing the sound was independent of the environment. By the fifth night, curiosity turned to unease. The pulse seemed to subtly synchronize with the researchers' heartbeats. Those working closest to the sarcophagus described brief sensations of vertigo, as if gravity itself had shifted. One technician experienced nausea and retreated to the surface, convinced the chamber was breathing with him. When the infrasound was played back at an audible frequency, it produced a hollow, droning throb, hypnotic, almost melodic. Listeners reported an irrational feeling of presence, as though the sound carried intention. The team's sleep grew restless. Several awoke in the night believing they'd heard muffled voices echoing through the valley floor, though no recording devices had captured anything above the subsonic range. Finally, Dr. Karim decided to test whether the sound was reactive. He ordered a controlled disturbance, a short burst of white noise at varying amplitudes. The results were chilling. After each pulse, the chamber's infrasound shifted, returning not immediately, but gradually, as if adjusting itself in response. The tomb wasn't just emitting a tone, it was listening. When dawn came, the air inside the chamber felt heavier, thicker. The instrument still registered the steady rhythm, unwavering and alive. As Dr. Karim reviewed the overnight data, he noticed one final anomaly. The infrasound's frequency had changed slightly, not random drift, but a deliberate shift downward by 0.2 Hz, altering its pattern to match the resting heart rate of an adult human at sleep. He closed the laptop and looked toward the sealed sarcophagus. The sound continued, quiet and patient, echoing through the limestone like a buried pulse, ancient, steady, and very much awake. Inside the sarcophagus, when the lid was lifted, the team expected a mummy. Instead, they found layers of fine powder ash mixed with fragments of gold leaf and bone. DNA tests later revealed the remains belonged to multiple individuals. The moment the sarcophagus opened, a dull shimmer filled the air, not of light, but of suspended dust. The interior was lined with a residue so delicate that even a breath could disturb it. There were no wrappings, no amulets, no trace of the human form that typically defines Egyptian burials. What lay before the archaeologists looked less like a body and more like the aftermath of combustion, as though flesh and bone had been reduced to dust inside a sealed void where fire should not have existed. The powder itself was unlike ordinary ash. Under magnification, its texture revealed crystalline granules mixed with organic carbon. Embedded within were microflakes of gold leaf, each less than a millimeter wide, still gleaming faintly under the lamplight. There were also traces of calcined bone, tiny fragile splinters belonging to more than one skeleton. Genetic sequencing later confirmed at least 3 distinct DNA profiles. One male, one female, and one indeterminate due to damage. The results suggested that the tomb did not belong to a single person, but a fusion of several. Theories diverged quickly. Some speculated it was a ritual cremation, a rare practice among Egyptians who normally sought bodily preservation. But that explanation fell apart under closer examination. There was no soot, no burn residue on the sarcophagus walls, and no sign of fuel. The temperatures required to reduce bone to powder exceed 800 degrees Celsius, impossible within an oxygen-starved chamber. Whatever occurred inside, it had replicated the effects of fire without flame. Chemical analysis detected traces of mercury, copper oxide, and natron fused together in microscopic beads, compounds that can generate intense exothermic reactions under the right conditions. It seemed the ancient embalmers had orchestrated a controlled chemical transformation. Perhaps they sought not to preserve the body, but to transmute it, to return it to an elemental state. Among the fragments, the team uncovered something stranger still. It was made of polished copper, its surface etched with faint concentric lines that glimmered under infrared light. When digitally enhanced, the etching formed a star map, a mirror of the night sky above Luxor, around 2050 BCE. Each constellation was positioned with mathematical precision, suggesting astronomical knowledge far beyond its era. Beneath the disk lay a small cluster of unburned linen fibers, their weave pattern consistent with ceremonial wrappings. Radiocarbon dating placed them within the same century, yet the fibers emitted a faint, oily scent, resin mixed with an unknown aromatic compound that defied identification. "It's as though it never decayed," remarked Dr. Karim, noting the fiber's resistance to touch. The distribution of the ash revealed one final anomaly. It wasn't random. The powder formed thin rings radiating outward from the sarcophagus center, as if deposited by slow rotation. When the team modeled the pattern, it resembled the diffusion rings produced by low-frequency vibration, possibly the same infrasound later recorded in the chamber. The implication was unsettling. The body or bodies might have been exposed to sustained acoustic energy, breaking down matter at a molecular level. By the 3rd day, the atmosphere inside the tomb grew heavy. Instruments recorded faint magnetic pulses synchronized with the heartbeat-like rhythm still emanating from below the floor. The ash itself responded minute shifts visible under microscope, the particles trembling imperceptibly as though resonating with the sound. "It's moving," whispered one researcher, watching through the lens. "It's responding to us." Further testing was halted after a thin film of condensation appeared on the copper disc, even in the chamber's arid air. When wiped clean, the moisture reformed minutes later, coalescing along the etched star paths. The droplets aligned themselves into tiny points of light, each one resting exactly where a star had been carved. Dr. Karim ordered the sarcophagus recovered that night. His field notes contained a single observation. The tomb may not preserve death, it may preserve transition. As the lid slid back into place, the rhythmic infrasound rose for several seconds, echoing faintly through the passage before fading to silence. The dust settled again, the copper disc vanishing beneath its veil of ash, as if the chamber itself had exhaled, content to sleep once more. The copper mirror. At the head of the coffin lay a circular disc of polished copper. When cleaned, its surface revealed faint etchings, concentric circles matching star positions from 2050 BCE. The object was thin, no more than a few millimeters deep, yet its craftsmanship exceeded anything expected from its supposed age. Ancient copper artifacts usually corrode, turning green with centuries of oxidation. Under the lamplight, its surface seemed to drink in the glow rather than reflect it, holding the light like water held in tension. At first, archaeologists assumed it to be ceremonial, perhaps the lid of a canopic jar or an ornamental mirror for the deceased. But when placed upright, the disc balanced perfectly on its edge, an impossible feat for an object hand-forged by ancient means. Its weight distribution was flawless, its geometry precise to a fraction of a millimeter. Whatever its purpose, it had been made with astonishing skill. Under magnification, the faint etchings became visible circles within circles, each aligned toward a central point. Within those rings, minute indentations marked positions of known stars: Sirius, Canopus, and Deneb. Astrophysicists later confirmed that the configuration matched the night sky over Luxor on the spring equinox of 2050 BCE, a date coinciding with Egypt's early Middle Kingdom. Yet other markings suggested knowledge of constellations invisible from Egypt's latitude, including the Southern Cross. To chart those, the maker would have needed to understand the curvature of the Earth, or have access to maps drawn from far to the south. The disk's reverse side held another surprise. When cleaned gently with distilled water, faint ridges appeared, not etched but pressed into the metal from beneath, as though moulded by heat and force rather than engraved by hand. These ridges formed a spiral identical to the one found on the tomb's earlier walls, the script in the dark. It seemed to echo the same language, though rendered in metal instead of stone. When light from a portable halogen lamp struck the disc at a shallow angle, something remarkable occurred. The concentric lines refracted the beam into a tight helix of reflected light, which projected faintly onto the chamber's ceiling. The reflection was not static, it pulsed gently, following the same 1820 Hz rhythm recorded throughout the tomb. "It's resonating," whispered Dr. Karim. The team stood in silence as the light pulse traced an invisible pattern above the sarcophagus, slowly forming a circular halo before fading. Testing revealed that the copper contained traces of arsenic and tin, an alloy rare in Egyptian metallurgy, but known for its unusual acoustic properties. When struck softly, the disc produced a tone of precisely 432 Hz, a frequency long associated with harmony and resonance. It rang for nearly 20 seconds before fading into silence. The team recorded it, and the playback later revealed subtle undertones, faint, whispering harmonics hidden within the main note. These discoveries blurred the line between science and ritual. The disc was no mere mirror. It behaved as a kind of transducer, a bridge between sound and light, form and vibration. Some speculated it served as a ceremonial instrument, designed to align the deceased spirit with celestial cycles. Others believed it was a navigation tool of a different sort, not for earthly travel, but for what the ancients called the journey through the stars. Later, when the chamber was darkened and illuminated only by candlelight, the mirror's surface produced a ghostly reflection not of the viewer, but of the chamber itself inverted, as if the tomb were looking back. Cameras captured faint geometric distortions surrounding the image, bending light toward the disc's center. The effect was optical, but unsettling. "It doesn't reflect," said Dr. Hassan quietly. "It remembers." The copper mirror was eventually sealed in a protective case for transport, but during cataloguing, technicians noticed one final detail. When the disk's position was changed by even a few degrees, the magnetic readings in the chamber shifted. The field strength rose and fell in rhythm with its orientation, as if the mirror were interacting with the tomb's unseen energy. By the following morning, the disk was returned to its resting place atop the coffin. The magnetic pulse calmed instantly. In the team's official report, the artifact was labelled simply as circular copper mirror, object 9 amperes. But in the private notes left behind, a line appeared underlined twice. "When the light strikes the mirror, the tomb breathes. No one dared test it again." The architect's mark. On the rear wall, someone had carved a single name, Semet Ankh. The inscription was found almost by accident. While photographing the chamber's rear wall, an archaeologist brushed away a thin crust of mineral sediment and uncovered faint scratches. At first, they seemed random erosion marks, perhaps caused by centuries of condensation. But when the dust was cleared, the shape of the characters became unmistakable. The name was written in careful, deliberate strokes, each glyph deep enough to survive the weight of millennia. And there, below it, a smaller line of hieratic script curved upward, cut at a strange angle that could only have been made by someone carving from within the room, not outside it. The idea was unthinkable. Egyptian tombs were sealed from the outside in a carefully staged ritual. Once closed, the inner chambers were meant to remain untouched for eternity. But the direction of the chisel marks told a different story. This inscription had been made by a hand that already stood on the wrong side of the door. Experts debated the possibilities. Could Semet Ankh have been the builder, trapped accidentally while sealing the chamber? The phrase, "he who closed the door," suggested choice, not accident. It implied completion, a duty willingly fulfilled. Some hypothesized that he was the architect himself, entombing both his work and himself in one final act of devotion. Others saw something darker. A guardian sacrifice, an ancient practice whispered about but rarely proven, where the last craftsman remained within to protect the tomb's sanctity. The letters themselves were carved with precision far beyond the rough graffiti left by workers in other sites. Under magnification, researchers discovered something extraordinary. Each groove bore microscopic residues of copper dust. The chisel, it seemed, had been dipped in metal before striking the stone, as though to leave not just words but a traceable chemical signature. The copper had oxidized into a pale turquoise hue, giving the letters a ghostly glow when struck by light. When scanned with ultraviolet imaging, the carving revealed additional markings invisible to the naked eye, a ring of dots encircling the name. Their spacing was precise, forming a geometric pattern identical to one found on the copper mirror discovered earlier in the tomb. When overlaid digitally, the two symbols aligned perfectly, the center of the circle resting directly on the A in Ankh. The connection was unmistakable. Whoever Semet Ankh was, he understood the tomb's hidden mathematics better than anyone else. But the most chilling evidence came from the wall itself. Behind the inscription, ground-penetrating sensors detected a small cavity, roughly the size of a human skull. Within it, a faint metallic echo was recorded, possibly a tool, possibly something more. When a fiber camera was inserted through a microbore, it showed a narrow hollow lined with calcite crystals, glinting like frost. At its center lay an object coated in black pitch. The team decided not to disturb it. It was placed with purpose, Dr. Karim noted in his journal. Let the dead keep their architect. As the researchers continued to study the inscription, another detail emerged. The name Semet Ankh translated loosely to "one who joins life to silence." It was not a name found in any known Egyptian record, but its structure echoed that of initiates or priest engineers, men who worked on sacred geometry, aligning temples and tombs with the stars. If that translation was true, Semet Ankh might not have been a builder at all. He could have been something rarer, a ritual mathematician, someone entrusted to bridge the physical and celestial worlds. On the final night before the chamber was resealed for preservation, one of the technicians noticed something unusual. The air temperature near the carving had dropped by almost 3 degrees. Audio recorders captured a low resonance, not the rhythmic pulse from before, but a single, sustained tone. It lasted 8 seconds, fading just as the last light struck the wall. The next morning, the inscription looked unchanged. But those who had been there swore the turquoise hue had deepened overnight, glowing faintly in the shadows like a signature rediscovered. In the logbook, Dr. Karim added one last line beneath the day's entry. He who closed the door has not yet left. The temperature drop. Data logs from the chamber show an unexplained fall of 6 degrees Celsius within minutes of opening. Instruments confirmed no external cause. The shift lasted exactly 40 minutes, then stabilized. It began just after sunrise, when the excavation team re-entered the burial chamber to continue documentation. The air was still and dry, the lights humming softly in the gloom. Within 5 minutes, condensation began to form on metal surfaces, first the tripods, then the camera lenses. At first, they assumed it was a malfunction in the air sensors, or a sudden change in humidity. But the readings told another story. The external environment above ground remained constant at 36 degrees Celsius, while inside the tomb, the temperature dropped steadily 30 degrees Celsius, 27 degrees Celsius, 25 degrees Celsius. The descent was smooth, unwavering, and symmetrical. The team paused work, uncertain whether the drop could damage the fragile walls. Yet despite the chill, there was no draft, no wind, no change in air pressure. The coal did not move through the chamber like weather. It appeared all at once, uniform, as if the stone itself had begun to breathe out frost. Within minutes, the air took on a new texture, heavy, metallic, and faintly sweet, like the scent of resin before rain. Infrared sensors mapped the temperature distribution and revealed something stranger still. The cooling wasn't random. It radiated outward from the sarcophagus, spreading evenly in concentric circles until every corner of the room had reached the same temperature. The source of the anomaly was fixed, centered precisely where the copper mirror had rested at the head of the coffin. Dr. Karim ordered the team to monitor the phenomenon in silence. Data loggers ticked as the minutes passed, recording a steady 6 degrees Celsius difference from baseline. After 20 minutes, their breath began to mist faintly under the lamplight. One worker noted that even sound felt altered: the rustle of paper, the scuff of boots. Each noise seemed muted, flattened as if the cold absorbed it. At the 30-minute mark, thermal cameras showed subtle variations along the walls. It was as if the walls themselves were exhaling warmth, surrendering it back into the tomb. Several technicians reported a sensation of static against their skin, a faint prickling similar to standing near an electrical field. Instruments confirmed no measurable current. Then, precisely at the 40th minute, the drop ceased. The temperature stabilized at its lowest point for 60 seconds, then began rising again, not gradually, but in a single, smooth surge. Within moments, the room returned to its original warmth. The condensation vanished, and the air cleared. The transition was as symmetrical as it had begun, exact to the decimal. The event was logged in 3 independent systems: atmospheric sensors, thermal cameras, and handheld probes. Every instrument agreed. The cold had emerged, lingered 40 minutes, and retreated, leaving no trace of its mechanism. Later analysis ruled out every environmental explanation. No gas release, no pressure change, no groundwater intrusion. Even the chamber's magnetic field remained steady throughout. The only notable correlation was a spike in low-frequency sound, a brief resonance between 18 and 20 Hz, the same pulse recorded earlier near the sarcophagus. The drop had followed the sound perfectly, as if the two were connected. In later weeks, the pattern repeated twice more, each time under identical conditions. 40 minutes after re-entry, 40 minutes of cold, then silence. It became ritual, a cycle that obeyed no natural law. Dr. Karim refused to call it supernatural. He preferred response. Something in the tomb was reacting not to movement or light, but to presence. It behaves like equilibrium, he wrote in his notes, a correction between what is warm and what has woken. Before sealing the site again, one last reading was taken. The sensors showed a brief pulse of cold air emanating from the copper mirror, dropping by exactly 6 degrees Celsius and then rising. The same number, the same timing, 40 minutes, always 40, the hidden passageway. Behind a false panel, workers uncovered a vertical shaft descending 30 meters. Its sides were smooth, not carved as though melted by heat. At the bottom lay a sealed bronze door untouched by corrosion. The panel had been discovered accidentally when a technician's hammer struck a hollow echo against what was believed to be solid limestone. Once cleared, a narrow seam appeared almost invisible, running from ceiling to floor. Behind it, the scanners revealed a perfectly round void plunging straight down, its diameter consistent from top to bottom. When the section of wall was removed, a rush of cold air escaped, dense, dry, and sterile. Flashlights revealed that the shaft walls glistened faintly. They weren't carved or plastered, but fused smooth, as if the stone had been subjected to intense heat and allowed to liquefy before hardening again. No ancient method could account for it. The rock's composition showed signs of vitrification, a transformation requiring temperatures above 1000 degrees Celsius. A reinforced tripod was set over the opening, and a camera was lowered first. The descent revealed a column of glassy stone extending 30 meters into the earth. At the bottom, the lens captured a glint of bronze, reflecting light back toward the surface. A door, pristine and perfectly sealed. When the team descended, they found the metal untouched by time. No corrosion, no dust, no mechanical fittings. It looked poured, not forged. 3 concentric rings had been etched across its face, with a single raised sphere at the center, smooth, cold, and darker than the rest. Metallurgical readings detected traces of arsenic and tin alloyed into the copper base, forming a compound resistant to oxidation, yet unknown in Egyptian metallurgy. When they measured temperature, the bronze registered 6 degrees cooler than its surroundings. The chill radiated faintly, as though the metal absorbed heat. Touching it with a gloved hand produced a tingling sensation, static discharge. Though no electrical source existed, magnetometers confirmed a weak but stable magnetic field emanating from the center ring, pulsing in slow rhythm. Attempts to image beyond the door failed. Ground-penetrating radar returned, scattered echoes, not of stone, but of space, a hollow cavity irregular in shape, as if carved into a void of unknown depth. The signal degraded whenever the scanner approached the center of the door, as though absorbed. Later that evening, while the site was quiet, a low vibration began to rise from the shaft. It wasn't audible at first, but the instruments caught it 19 Hz, the same infrasound frequency recorded throughout the tomb. The pulse grew stronger near the bronze door, then stopped instantly. One technician described it as a heartbeat held in metal. The next morning, they lowered an ultrasonic microphone. For 20 minutes, silence, then a single burst of sound, a low hum that faded into static. When played back at higher speed, it resembled a breath. The recording was logged. but no one could explain it. By evening, the air within the shaft had cooled again. Thin mist formed briefly near the surface, curling upward before dispersing. The walls emitted faint static when touched. The team decided to reseal the opening until proper containment could be arranged. Before closing the shaft, Dr. Karim placed his hand on the bronze surface once more. "It's warm now," he said quietly, though the thermometer read otherwise. In his notes that night he wrote, "It feels less like a door, more like something waiting for permission to open itself." Metal that shouldn't exist. Spectrographic analysis of that bronze revealed traces of arsenical copper alloyed with tin far purer than known ancient sources. Its crystalline structure resembled modern industrial metal, yet it dated to 1900 BCE. The first tests were done in the field, using a handheld spectrometer brought to the site for routine composition checks. What began as routine analysis turned into a scientific anomaly. The alloy contained almost no impurities, less than 0.01% levels, unattainable by ancient smelting methods. Bronze from this era typically showed heavy contamination from lead and iron, remnants of primitive ore extraction. But this sample was flawless. It wasn't hammered or cast by hand. It appeared to have been engineered. When samples were sent to the Cairo Materials Institute for verification, the results were confirmed. The microstructure of the metal displayed uniform crystalline alignment, a pattern found only in metals subjected to consistent electromagnetic refinement, a process developed less than a century ago. Yet isotopic dating of the copper confirmed an origin nearly 4,000 years old. Dr. Karim's team considered contamination. Could the door have been tampered with by later civilizations? But the stratigraphy surrounding it was undisturbed, no signs of intrusion, no tool marks newer than the Middle Kingdom period. Even the mineral patina between the bronze and limestone had formed over millennia, locking the door in geological time. The object was ancient beyond dispute, but its material composition belonged to the future. Further testing deepened the riddle. When the alloy was heated, it exhibited unusual thermal behavior. Most bronze expands predictably as temperature rises, but this specimen contracted by less than 1%, yet enough to defy normal physics. Cooling reversed the effect. The metal seemed to seek equilibrium, as though responding to environmental change rather than obeying it. Electrical tests yielded similar impossibilities. When a mild current was applied, the alloy produced a faint rhythmic oscillation, not static, but a steady waveform at 18 Hz, the same subsonic frequency recorded throughout the tomb. It was as if the metal was alive within the same resonance as the chamber itself, reacting to the field that surrounded it. Researchers theorized that the alloy could have been forged under conditions of intense heat and vibration, perhaps through a natural event, like a lightning strike or meteor impact, but the purity and symmetry argued for deliberate manufacture. Under magnification, the surface revealed microstriations arranged in hexagonal grids, a pattern no ancient mold or tool could produce. Dr. Karim noted that when laser light passed across the sample, it diffracted in concentric rings rather than a straight reflection, as though the metal contained a lattice designed to manipulate energy. The discovery blurred the line between metallurgy and technology. "This isn't decoration," he wrote in his notes. "It's function." The bronze also emitted a faint magnetic signature, even when isolated from the tomb. When rotated, the field aligned with true north, suggesting orientation was built into its structure. Ancient Egyptians revered magnetic minerals like hematite for spiritual rituals. But this alloy's behavior indicated something beyond symbolism. Perhaps navigation, resonance, or even containment. In the days following the discovery, every attempt to reproduce the alloy failed. When researchers tried to melt and recast a small shaving from the sample, it vaporized instantly at a lower temperature than standard bronze. leaving no residue. It resisted both replication and destruction. In his final report, Dr. Karim described the metal as an engineered material with self-regulating properties existing centuries before engineering itself. He added a final line beneath it, underlined twice. If this metal was made, then its maker understood laws of heat, magnetism, and vibration lost to us now, or never meant for us to find. The chamber of reversal. Beyond the bronze door, the corridor sloped upward again, leading to a mirrored layout of the upper tomb, every relief reversed, every inscription backward, as though reflecting another world. The passage was narrow, carved in perfect alignment with the corridor above it. As the team advanced, light shimmered oddly against the smooth stone, producing faint reflections where there should have been none. The temperature remained a steady 16 degrees, yet the air felt thinner, almost hollow, as if something vast pressed outward from behind the walls. The first chamber mirrored the burial hall in precise geometry. The same dimensions, the same corners, but every element was inverted. Where the guardian statue had once faced inward, here it faced the doorway, palms turned downward instead of up. Its obsidian eyes no longer caught the light. They absorbed it completely. The carved texts along the wall ran backward, their hieroglyphs mirrored like writing seen through water. When translated in reverse, their meaning changed. Instead of prayers for safe passage into the afterlife, the lines became warnings about return phrases like, "He who leaves may not remember," and "To cross twice is to awaken the dust." The language was identical to that of the upper tomb, but reversed in syntax and intent, as though written for those attempting to re-enter the world of the living. At the center stood another sarcophagus, identical in size to the one above, yet made of white alabaster. Its lid was slightly displaced, leaving a narrow seam of darkness visible inside. Instruments confirmed no trace of organic residue, no human remains, no sign of burial. The vessel had been prepared but never used. The copper mirror's twin was embedded in the rear wall, spiraling counterclockwise instead of clockwise. When illuminated, it did not reflect light outward, it seemed to draw light inward, swallowing brightness and leaving a halo of faint distortion around its edge. Laser scanning revealed the spiral's grooves had been cut to microscopic precision, following a ratio inverse to the golden section. Sound behaved differently here. A spoken word echoed twice, once normally and once in reverse, delayed by less than a second. Recordings captured the echo forming before the voice that caused it, as though the chamber responded before being addressed. When the space was mapped using radar, the data refused to align. The coordinates of the lower and upper chambers overlapped perfectly, suggesting both existed in the same position, separated by only 6 meters. An impossible configuration. It's as if the same architecture is folded back upon itself, noted Dr. Karim. Like two reflections touching. Further inside, a relief depicted a figure standing between 2 doors, one black and one white. Above it was written, "The one who closed the first will open the second." The signature beneath matched the architect's Semet Unc. At 1942, vibration sensors registered a low resonance, the familiar 18 Hz tone, stronger here than anywhere else. The alabaster sarcophagus trembled faintly, producing a hum felt in the bones more than heard. As light played across its surface, the reflection inside the copper mirror brightened briefly, showing not the chamber, but its reversed twin, empty and waiting. Then the hum stopped. Silence returned. Absolute and heavy. That night, in his field notes, Dr. Karim wrote only one line: "The mirror is not a symbol, it is a threshold, and we are standing on its wrong side." The sand clock mosaic. At the center of this mirrored chamber lay a floor inlaid with quartz and hematite, forming the pattern of an hourglass. When light struck it, the stones glowed faintly, an optical effect still unexplained. The mosaic was unlike anything previously found in Egyptian tombs. Each half of the hourglass shape was composed of thousands of fine quartz shards, set so precisely that not even a strand of hair could pass between them. The darker stone, hematite, traced the outline, deep grey veined with red, its surface polished to a mirror-like sheen. The craftsmanship defied both time and known technique. When the archaeologists first illuminated the floor, the light refracted across the surface in slow, fluid movement, as if the stones were absorbing and releasing brightness in alternating waves. At first, the glow was dismissed as reflection from their floodlights, but when the lamps were dimmed, the mosaic continued to shimmer faintly, independent of any external source. The illumination was not constant, it pulsed softly, fading and returning in steady rhythm. The pattern matched the same 18 Hz frequency that had haunted the site since the first day of excavation. The chamber seemed to be breathing through stone. When Dr. Karim knelt to examine the inlay, he noticed the quartz pieces were cut into irregular facets, miniature prisms that scattered light inward rather than outward. Under magnification, the facets formed spiraling alignments, converging toward the hourglass's narrow midpoint. It looked as though the floor itself had been designed to funnel light, sound, and energy toward a single invisible axis at the center. Geophysicists later confirmed that a mild electromagnetic field pulsed from that point, fluctuating in time with the luminous rhythm. The quartz, a piezoelectric mineral, reacted to even small vibrations, converting pressure into electric charge. It seemed the mosaic wasn't decorative at all. It was functional, a kind of ancient transducer, translating the tomb's subsonic pulse into visible light. The symbolism was equally haunting. The hourglass, half dark, half bright, was an image of time reversed, of balance restored. The upper half, made of hematite, represented solidity and weight. The lower half, of quartz, transparency and movement. But in this tomb, the positions were reversed. The light half above, the dark half below. It suggested a deliberate inversion, perhaps echoing the mirrored layout of the entire chamber. As the researchers recorded data, one technician stepped directly over the mosaic. The instant his foot touched the center, every instrument reading spiked. Temperature dropped by 3 degrees. A static crackle filled their headsets. Then the glow intensified, bleeding outward through the floor like ink in water. The pulse quickened, still faint, but now perceptible through vibration in the soles of their boots. They froze. Dr. Karim ordered everyone back. Within seconds, the light faded, and the sensors stabilized. No damage occurred, but the event left a silence more unsettling than sound. Reviewing the footage later, the team noticed something invisible during the moment. A faint, shimmering column rising from the hourglass center. A distortion of air, cylindrical, flickering like heat over sand. Analysis showed that for exactly 40 seconds, the same number repeated throughout the tomb's anomalies. The electromagnetic field had doubled in strength, then collapsed. When the data was graphed, it resembled the pattern of a pendulum slowing to rest. That night, Dr. Karim wrote in his field notes, "The floor measures time not as movement, but as balance when disturbed. It seeks correction." He suspected that the chamber's geometry, the mirrored architecture, and the resonant floor were all components of a single mechanism, not mechanical in the modern sense, but harmonic, a machine of stone and silence, built to maintain equilibrium between two mirrored spaces. Before leaving, he stood again before the mosaic, shining his light across it one last time. The glow returned briefly, tracing the shape of the hourglass with near-human precision, and in that instant, every quartz shard seemed to tilt slightly, catching the beam not as reflection but as recognition. The light faded. The chamber returned to stillness. Yet, as the team ascended the passage, the sensors below flickered once more, recording a single pulse from the mosaic floor 40 seconds long. Residue of burning without fire. On the ceiling, scientists found microscopic vitrification stone melted at 1000 degrees Celsius. Yet no soot, no scorch marks, and no oxygen traces. Whatever heated the chamber had done so, without flame. The discovery came during microscopic analysis of the mirrored chamber's upper vault. Samples collected from the quartz-lined ceiling revealed patches of fused silicate stone that had been briefly liquefied, then cooled into glass. Under normal conditions, such transformation required extreme temperatures, the kind generated only by volcanic activity or focused energy far beyond anything available to ancient civilizations. Yet this vitrification appeared local, limited to a few square meters, precise and clean, as if applied by design. No signs of combustion existed anywhere else in the tomb. The walls were cold and unblackened, the air devoid of carbon residue. Even microscopic dust samples showed no trace of organic ash. "It burned without burning," noted Dr. Karim in his field log. "Heat without heat, fire without flame. When ultraviolet light was passed across the vitrified zone, the surface emitted a faint bluish fluorescence, subtle but constant, pulsing gently in rhythm, with the 18 Hz vibration already known throughout the site. Each element, stone, metal and mineral, seemed linked by a shared resonance, as though responding to a common frequency. Thermal modeling suggested a single burst of radiant energy, lasting less than 3 seconds. It had melted the surface uniformly, then cooled instantly, leaving no thermal gradient behind. The surrounding limestone remained untouched. Whatever caused the reaction had focused perfectly, like a beam, but left no source, no residue, no directionality, no damage elsewhere. At first, researchers proposed lightning, but no carbonized pathways were found, and the tomb's depth made such an event impossible. Laser energy was considered next, though no evidence of beam dispersion existed. In the end, the data fit nothing known. Not plasma, not radiation, not chemical. "The stone itself seems to have supplied the heat," said one physicist. "It's as if the energy came from within." Further study revealed that the vitrified areas aligned precisely with the mirrored chamber's geometric nodes, the intersection points of the ceiling's carved spirals. When mapped against the hourglass mosaic on the floor, the two patterns overlapped perfectly, forming a three-dimensional hourglass of energy flow, a channel linking above and below. It appeared that whatever event had heated the chamber had occurred along this axis, uniting ceiling and floor in a single pulse. When vibration sensors were placed near the ceiling, they registered faint oscillations, not random but patterned, repeating in intervals of 40 seconds. The rhythm was too precise to be geological. It matched the temperature cycles and electromagnetic surges recorded in earlier chambers. It was as if the tomb's architecture still remembered the energy that shaped it, replaying it endlessly, like an echo trapped in matter. Dr. Karim suggested the vitrification might represent an intentional act, an ancient experiment in transmutation or preservation. Perhaps they sought to seal this chamber not with stone, but with light, he wrote. The idea seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The ceiling had melted, but nothing around it had burned. Late one evening, as researchers reviewed infrared footage, they noticed something unsettling. When the temperature in the chamber dropped slightly, the vitrified patches flickered. The faint luminescence rippled across the ceiling like reflections on water responding, somehow, to environmental change. The phenomenon lasted only moments, but the implication was chilling. The event that melted the stone might not be finished. In his final note that night, Dr. Karim wrote, "The chamber carries a memory of its own ignition. Whatever happened here, it still breathes beneath the surface." The 7 jars. Arranged along one wall stood 7 alabaster vessels, each sealed with wax. Infrared scans revealed organic contents, but the team opened only one. Inside was a desiccated lotus flower, still blue in colour. They had been found standing perfectly aligned, bases embedded in a shallow groove carved into the stone, as though placed not just for display, but for balance. The alabaster was milky white, faintly translucent, with surfaces so smooth they seemed almost polished from within. No inscriptions marked them, no symbols of offering or ownership, just 7 identical forms, sealed so completely that even millennia had failed to breach their bonds. When the first lid was carefully lifted, the faintest scent of something floral, impossibly sweet and cold, escaped into the chamber. The lotus inside was brittle, yet astonishingly preserved, its petals still tinted with blue pigment. Scientists confirmed it was genuine coloration, not paint. The pigment, derived from natural anthocyanins, should have faded thousands of years ago. Yet it glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, as if recently gathered. Infrared scans of the remaining jars revealed each held something different. One contained fibrous material, another faint mineral residue, another what appeared to be granulated salt or crystallized sap. One jar emitted low electromagnetic readings, unlike anything organic. The pattern was rhythmic, mirroring the same 18 Hz resonance observed in the tomb's architecture. The jars were not random. They were arranged in order of alternating density: light, heavy, suggesting deliberate sequencing. When plotted on a frequency graph, their electromagnetic profiles formed a harmonic scale. Chemical testing of the open jar revealed that the lotus had been steeped in a mixture of copper sulfate and natron, both conductive and preservative. When dissolved in trace humidity, the compounds could generate microcurrents. "They made a flower that responds to its surroundings," said Dr. Karim quietly. "It's not just preserved, it's awake." When sensors were placed around the jars, each emitted subtle magnetic fluctuations, individually faint, but when measured collectively, they created a steady pulse that synchronized with the tomb's ambient vibration. The energy was low, harmless yet precise, consistent down to the second. It was as though the jars were maintaining the chamber's balance, the way tuning forks sustain resonance in a silent room. Opening a second vessel was debated heavily. Ethical guidelines warned against disturbing sealed artifacts without clear justification. But one night, after another 40-minute temperature fluctuation rippled through the tomb, Dr. Karim made the decision. When the second jar's lid was lifted, a faint shimmer appeared on the inner surface condensation, forming instantly despite the dry air. Inside lay a fine grey powder. Under magnification, it was revealed to be pulverized hematite mixed with organic spores. The spores were inert, but DNA sequencing identified them as belonging to a plant species, long extinct, one found only in ancient riverbeds predating the Nile's known course. By morning, the jars were resealed and placed back into position. Yet something in the room felt subtly altered. The air pressure shifted slightly, as if the tomb had exhaled. In the logbook that day, Dr. Karim wrote, "Each jar seems to hold a fragment of time, sound, scent, colour, memory suspended between life and decay." The unreadable map, a papyrus fragment found in a niche, bore a series of coordinates written in Proto-Hieratic numerals. When translated, they corresponded to points along the Nile and one location beneath the Red Sea. The discovery came late in the excavation, almost overlooked among scattered debris near the mirrored chamber's rear wall. The fragment was no larger than a hand, brittle yet astonishingly intact. Its fibres shimmered faintly under raking light, coated in a residue of copper salts that had preserved its surface. The ink, a deep brown-black, remained sharp enough to read under magnification, but what it contained was not language, it was geometry. Across the fragment ran a grid of numbers and short linear notations. At first glance, they appeared meaningless, random strokes and dots. But when researchers transcribed the values and plotted them digitally, a pattern began to emerge. A string of coordinates tracing the Nile's course from south to north: Luxor, Abydos, Giza, before veering sharply east toward the Red Sea. The final coordinate, when converted into modern latitude and longitude, landed far offshore, at a depth of nearly 800 meters. Egyptologist Dr. Hassan noted that the script predated the Middle Kingdom by several centuries. Proto-hieratic numerals like these were transitional used during the early dynastic era for accounting and construction, yet their arrangement here bore no relation to measurement or commerce. It was a map, but a map written in numbers alone, without text or direction markers. When overlaid on satellite data, the Nile coordinates aligned almost perfectly with known temple sites, but each one was offset slightly by exact increments of 0.618 degrees, the ratio of the golden section. The same ratio defined the geometry of the tomb itself. Whoever composed the map understood mathematics at a level that merged precision with symbolism, form with meaning. The final coordinate, the one beneath the Red Sea, drew particular attention. Sonar data of that region showed nothing unusual, no island, no structure, only a narrow ridge of basalt and silt. Yet magnetic surveys from the 1990 seconds had recorded an anomaly there, a faint but consistent distortion in the seafloor's natural field. The papyrus seemed to mark that very spot. Under ultraviolet examination, faint glyphs appeared in the papyrus margins, not words, but repeating spirals identical to those carved into the tomb's walls. When connected digitally, they formed a pattern resembling an hourglass, bisected by a straight line, a symbol that had appeared again and again throughout the site. The implication was clear. The tomb was not an isolated monument, but part of a larger network aligned across Egypt's geography, perhaps even extending beneath the sea. When the fragment was placed under infrared light, something remarkable happened. The ink along the Nile coordinates absorbed heat, while the Red Sea coordinate reflected it. In thermal imaging, it appeared as a cold spot, a perfect void of temperature. The ink there contained trace elements of iron, nickel, and cobalt, identical to those found in meteorite alloys. "It's almost as if this point represents something that isn't on Earth," whispered one researcher. Dr. Karim refused to speculate publicly. But in his private notes he wrote, "The map may not depict geography at all, but resonance points where the Earth itself vibrates." He theorized that the coordinates marked sites tuned to specific frequencies, linked through architecture, minerals, and magnetic fields, a prehistoric system of energy or communication now long forgotten. Before the fragment was sealed in a nitrogen chamber, it was photographed under laser scanning. The reflected data revealed hidden symbols beneath the ink, etched directly into the papyrus fibers, before writing invisible without high resolution. They formed an inscription written backward, like everything else in the mirrored tomb. When reversed, it read, "Where the river meets the sea, light will rise again." The stone that rang. One pillar emitted a metallic tone when tapped. Acoustic engineers determined its resonance matched 432 hertzes, a frequency used in temple harmonics millennia later. Coincidence, or continuity of forgotten knowledge? The pillar stood near the mirrored chamber's entrance. Unremarkable at first glance, a monolith of limestone streaked with faint mineral veins, carved with the same reversed hieroglyphs that covered the surrounding walls. But during a survey of structural integrity, a technician struck its surface gently with a metal rod, and instead of a dull thud, the stone sang. The tone it produced was pure, sustained, and perfectly pitched at 432 cycles per second. At first, the sound seemed like a trick of acoustics, perhaps an echo caused by the chamber's geometry. Yet the phenomenon repeated every time the pillar was touched, its frequency unwavering. When measured with digital instruments, the resonance curve matched precisely that of tuned bronze impossible for raw limestone. Even more astonishing, the vibration lasted over 7 seconds, long after the initial strike had ended. The engineers quickly realized the stone was not solid. Subsurface scans revealed a hollow core, a vertical shaft running through its center, filled with a dense metallic residue. The deposit's composition included traces of copper, iron, and an unidentified crystalline compound that appeared to amplify sound waves. It acted as an ancient resonator, converting small vibrations into sustained tones. But why 432 Hz? That frequency, known today for its harmonic relationship to natural cycles, appeared in later Egyptian temple designs, where column spacing and chamber lengths were often calculated to produce the same pitch when wind or chanting filled the halls. It symbolized mathematical harmony, the vibration said to mirror the pulse of the earth itself. Yet, this pillar predated those temples by more than 1,000 years. Dr. Karim's team conducted controlled tests using precision mallets and audio transducers. Every strike produced identical waveforms. The tone spread through the entire chamber, creating interference patterns that formed geometric nodes of still air invisible but detectable through vapor tests. Within those nodes, sound vanished entirely, as if absorbed. It was as though the pillar and the room were part of a single acoustic system designed with purpose. Further study revealed that the stone's inner composition resonated not just at 432 Hz, but at multiple overtones, spaced at exact harmonic intervals, 216, 864, and 1728 Hz, all perfect doubles or halves of the base frequency. These numbers appeared throughout the tomb's measurements, the width of corridors, the spacing of reliefs, even the timing of temperature fluctuations. The entire site, it seemed, obeyed the mathematics of resonance. When the tone was played continuously using an external speaker, the pillar began to respond. Minute vibrations spread across its surface, visible through laser interferometry. The air pressure inside the chamber shifted by fractions of a pascal, creating a low, rhythmic oscillation, the same subtle pulse the team had recorded in earlier chapters of the excavation. That night, as an experiment, Dr. Karim asked the technicians to dim the lights and allow the frequency to play uninterrupted. As the 432 Hz tone filled the tomb, the quartz in the mosaic below began to shimmer faintly, not with light, but with motion, as though the vibration had awakened the minerals. For 40 minutes, the resonance continued. Then, without warning, the sound deepened, a lower note emerging from somewhere within the stone itself, not produced by any equipment. The tone faded slowly, leaving behind a silence that pressed like weight. When analyzed later, the recording showed an additional frequency that had not come from their instrument's 18 Hz. The familiar subsonic signature of the tomb, it had joined the pillar's harmonic response precisely at the moment the glow appeared. Dr. Karim wrote in his final log for the night, "Perhaps the builders did not tune the pillar to a note they liked. Perhaps they tuned it to something that was already here. 432 is not their creation. It is their reply." The twin sarcophagi beneath. Subsurface scans below the second chamber revealed two smaller coffins, side by side, constructed of basalt instead of limestone. Both were empty, but one showed impressions of chains within. The discovery came after weeks of geophysical mapping. The team had believed the mirrored chamber to be the tomb's lowest point, yet ground-penetrating radar revealed another void beneath two rectangular anomalies aligned perfectly under the central axis of the hourglass mosaic. When the dust was cleared and microcameras lowered through a borehole, the images confirmed it. Two basalt sarcophagi, black as oil, their lids unbroken. Basalt is one of the hardest stones known to ancient builders. Carving it with Bronze Age tools was nearly impossible, yet these coffins were cut with surgical precision, smooth interiors, flawless corners, and seams tight enough to hold air for eternity. Their surfaces reflected light in muted waves, as though they had absorbed centuries of stillness. When fiber optic probes were extended through microfissures along the edges, the interior of one coffin appeared empty, pristine, save for fine dust along the floor. But in the second, faint impressions marred the basalt surface. Twin grooves curving across the base, converging at one end into small circular depressions. When measured, the dimensions matched the shape of shackles restraints that once held something heavy and human-sized. "Chains," whispered one technician, barely audible in the darkness. Something was kept here. Magnetic readings confirmed it. Residual traces of iron oxide were embedded into the stone, though no metal remained. Whatever had been chained had long since vanished, yet the chemical ghost of iron lingered, burned into the basalt itself. Even stranger, the two sarcophagi shared a single foundation block. They weren't separate burials, but a paired construction mirror, images fused at the base like conjoined vessels. The engineers noted the symmetry, left and right, light and dark, one marked by chains, the other untouched. It mirrored the duality that haunted the entire tomb: reflection and inversion, preservation and release. When acoustic scans were performed, the stone responded differently. The unchained coffin produced a dull, empty resonance. The chained one, however, emitted a faint echo, low, continuous, and barely measurable, as though it retained memory of the vibration that had once bound it. The frequency, 18 Hz, the same infrasound that pulsed through every artifact in the site. Dr. Karim theorized that the paired sarcophagi might symbolize containment and sacrifice, not burial, but imprisonment. "Perhaps one was meant for the body and one for the echo," he wrote. "A prison not for the dead, but for something that could not be allowed to die." Later that evening, when heat sensors were lowered into the cavity, the air temperature inside the chained coffin was 2 degrees colder than its surroundings. Even after hours, the difference remained constant. The basalt absorbed thermal energy but refused to release it, like a vessel sealed with invisible force. During their final inspection, one technician reported hearing a faint clicking from the speaker, linked to the seismic sensor irregular, almost like breathing through static. The noise ceased whenever someone spoke, returning when the chamber fell silent. The recording was saved, but playback revealed nothing, only the faint hum of stone. When the basalt lids were finally scanned for inscriptions, the results astonished the linguists. Hidden under layers of mineral crystallization were faint hieroglyphs, mirrored and incomplete. When digitally reversed, the text read, "He bound the echo, but not the name." Dr. Karim refused to authorize physical excavation. The coffins were resealed under protective resin and left untouched. Before leaving, he placed his hand on the cold basalt through the borehole rim. "If these are prisons," he murmured, "then they're still doing their work." In his final entry for the day, he wrote one line beneath the data logs: 2 coffins, 1 silence, 1 remembering. Traces of mercury. Soil samples around the twin coffins contained elevated mercury levels, a substance the ancient Chinese and Egyptians alike associated with preservation of spirit rather than body. At first, the reading seemed like contamination. The mercury concentration in the basalt chamber was more than 50 times higher than in the surrounding limestone, far beyond anything explainable by natural mineralization. The scientists assumed the sensors were miscalibrated, but 3 independent labs confirmed the same result. The mercury wasn't random. It had been placed there intentionally, pooled and sealed in microscopic veins along the floor and walls. Under infrared light, faint silvery trails shimmered where liquid metal had once flowed, forming a delicate web of channels branching from the bases of the 2 sarcophagi. The pattern wasn't chaotic. It was geometric, symmetrical and balanced, as if engineered to direct the mercury in measured paths around the coffins. The configuration resembled a circuit diagram, each line linking specific points in the stone's architecture. Mercury's symbolic use in ancient cultures is well documented. In Egypt, it was considered the blood of the gods, a fluid believed to preserve essence, not flesh. In China, it filled imperial tombs as an offering of eternal life. Yet in this chamber, Its purpose appeared neither decorative nor funerary. The concentration and placement suggested functionality. A conductive network surrounding what was once bound below. When ground radar passed over the channels, the returning signals distorted, as though the stone itself had become slightly magnetic. Mercury, when exposed to vibration, generates electromagnetic fields. A property unknown to early civilizations, yet somehow anticipated here. It's not just chemistry, Dr. Karim observed. It's design. They knew what it could do. The vapor readings were equally perplexing. Despite the tomb's sealed environment, trace amounts of mercury gas were detected in the air far below toxic levels, but enough to form a measurable presence. The vapor concentration rose slightly every 40 minutes, the same interval recorded in the temperature and vibration cycles elsewhere in the site. The substance behaved rhythmically, as if responding to the tomb's unseen pulse. When spectral analysis mapped the distribution, the mercury network formed the outline of a vast, inverted figure, a double spiral stretching beneath the sarcophagi and converging at a single central node. That node sat directly under the chained coffin. It was as though the substance had been arranged to contain energy, not release it, a mechanism of entrapment, of preservation through restraint. The team's biochemist proposed an extraordinary idea. The mercury might have functioned as a living seal. Under constant vibration, it would remain in motion, circulating energy and preventing decay of whatever it surrounded. It's like a current, she said, a heartbeat made of metal. Late one night, as tests continued, the mercury levels briefly spiked. The detector lights flashed red, then stabilized within seconds. During that instant, the chamber's infrasound also intensified, the frequency rising by exactly 1 Hz. It was as though the tomb itself had reacted, acknowledging the disturbance. The event lasted less than a minute. But when reviewed later, the cameras captured something unexpected. A faint, silvery shimmer drifted across the floor vapor, moving against gravity, curling upward toward the basalt coffins before dispersing. No physical explanation held. The air was still, sealed, untouched. Dr. Karim refused further sampling after that. The chamber was resealed and marked for long-term preservation. In his final report, he avoided speculation, noting only the chemical facts, but in his private field journal, he wrote a single, more human line. They did not embalm bodies here. They preserved something that moved without breathing and made sure it could never leave. When the lights failed, during the 5th week, the site's generators cut out simultaneously. Instruments later showed an unexplained surge of electromagnetic interference centered in the burial hall. The blackout lasted less than 3 minutes, but everyone who was inside the tomb remembered it as far longer. The moment the lights went out, the air changed heavier, charged, as if filled with static before a storm. The hum of machinery ceased, replaced by absolute silence. Then came the vibration. Faint at first, rising from the floor through their boots, a deep pulse that seemed to beat in time with their own hearts. Outside, the backup systems flickered but failed to engage. The readings from every monitoring device, temperature, vibration, magnetic flux, spiked into nonsense. The chamber's baseline resonance, usually steady at 18 Hz, climbed rapidly, peaking at nearly 40. It was as if the entire tomb had become an electrical coil, briefly alive with invisible current. When the power returned, the scene was disorienting. Several workers had lost their sense of direction, claiming the walls had seemed to move during the blackout. Others reported flashes of light in the dark, faint arcs gliding across the chamber ceiling, like lightning trapped behind stone. Cameras captured none of it, only a brief burst of electromagnetic noise that erased every digital recording for exactly 180 seconds. In the hours that followed, the team reviewed what data remained. Every instrument had registered the same anomaly. A perfect electromagnetic pulse centered precisely at the tomb's heart, where the basalt coffins and mercury channels lay. The surge expanded outward through the passageways and dissipated evenly across the surrounding bedrock, as though the entire site had discharged energy. Yet the source was internal. No lightning, no power fault, no natural magnetic shift. The energy had come from within the tomb itself. Dr. Karim immediately ordered the power grid isolated from the chamber to prevent recurrence. But as soon as the systems were rebooted, one of the seismic sensors reactivated on its own. It began transmitting rhythmic clicks, perfectly spaced, identical to a human pulse. The sound lasted for 40 seconds, then ceased the same interval that defined every recurring anomaly in the site. Later that night, during inspection of the copper mirror in the mirrored chamber, the team discovered a thin film of condensation across its surface. The humidity levels had not changed. The moisture had appeared only there, forming a spiral pattern matching the etching's counterclockwise grooves. When wiped away, it reappeared within minutes, reforming the same pattern with mathematical precision. The next morning, technicians found that one of the quartz panels in the hourglass mosaic below had shifted slightly less than a millimeter, but enough to disrupt the symmetry. Infrared scans revealed residual heat in that exact section, faint but measurable, as if the stone had absorbed energy during the blackout. The rest of the floor remained cold. Researchers began to consider whether the tomb's architecture functioned as a single, integrated system, a structure designed not to hold the dead, but to regulate energy. The blackout, they theorized, was not an accident but a response. When external power interfered, the chamber reset itself, expelling the disturbance in a pulse. It behaved like an organism defending its equilibrium. In his nightly notes, Dr. Karim wrote, "The system reacted to presence, not pressure. It waited until we crossed a threshold, then exhaled. No further blackouts occurred, but subtle changes persisted. The magnetometers began to fluctuate at random intervals, and handheld compasses refused to stabilize near the main chamber. Even after sealing the passage for the day, the team could hear a faint ringing in the distance, not from the generators, but from within the walls themselves. When the recordings were played back, one segment of static stood out. Hidden inside the noise, slowed to 1/10 speed, was a pattern, a repeating sequence of 2 tones, perfectly spaced, echoing the tomb's original 18 Hz rhythm. It was not mechanical, it was deliberate. Dr. Karim closed the day's log with a single line beneath the data summary. It waited for darkness, and when the lights failed, it spoke. The wall that healed. After repairs resumed, workers noticed a crack in the corridor wall had vanished overnight. Photographs confirmed its disappearance. The plaster showed no sign of patching. The crack had been small, a thin fracture along the northern passage. First recorded after the generator failure, it ran less than a meter in length, wide enough to catch the light but stable enough not to threaten the structure. The restoration crew had flagged it for sealing the next day, but when they returned, the line was gone. Not filled, not repaired, gone, as though the wall had never been damaged. The surface where it had been was flawless, unbroken limestone. Under oblique light, no variation appeared in texture or colour. When compared with the previous day's photographs, the difference was irrefutable. Even the small flakes of dust that had fallen from it were missing from the floor. At first, the team assumed error, perhaps the fracture had been on another wall, misidentified. But every marker and measurement matched. Even the digital timestamp of the photo aligned with the coordinates of that exact spot. When infrared imaging was used to examine the wall, a faint network of thermal anomalies appeared beneath the surface, thin lines of cooler temperature, forming a subtle lattice. The pattern was organic, almost cellular, stretching beyond the location of the vanished crack. Over the next several hours, the cooler regions shifted, rearranging minutely as though the wall's composition were active. "It's moving," whispered one technician, watching the screen. "Very slowly, but it's alive in there." Samples taken from nearby plaster showed no sign of modern adhesive or chemical reaction. The binding material contained traces of silica, gypsum, and a compound resembling calcite, hydrate typical of ancient construction. But under high magnification, the silica crystals appeared fused in unusual formations, almost like melted glass. The structure wasn't weathered or decayed. It was self-fused, as if the wall had reconstituted its own fracture under heat and pressure that no one had applied. The temperature data from the previous night offered another clue. At 3:07 a.m., sensors in the passage registered a brief but significant spike, a localized rise of 12 degrees Celsius lasting exactly 40 seconds, followed by a sharp drop back to normal. The same 40-second interval had appeared in every previous anomaly. Whatever force pulsed through the tomb seemed to operate on that precise rhythm, and this time it had left behind visible proof of its work. Later, when ultraviolet light was cast across the wall, faint streaks of luminescence emerged fine, vein-like lines branching outward from the place where the crack had once been. The glow pulsed softly for a few seconds, fading as the air cooled. One of the engineers described it as watching a scar fade from living skin. Dr. Karim ordered no further disturbance to the corridor. "We repair what is ours," he said quietly. "This place repairs itself." That night, they placed motion-activated cameras in the passage. At dawn, one captured a faint shift in brightness, not movement, but a momentary flash across the wall, like light refracted through water. The event lasted less than half a second. When slowed to frame-by-frame analysis, it revealed a subtle distortion spreading outward from the wall's surface, rippling before vanishing entirely. The phenomenon repeated 2 nights later, always near the same location. Each time, a slight electromagnetic fluctuation accompanied it, measured at the same 18 Hz base frequency. It was as if the tomb itself was performing maintenance, a living system responding to imbalance. In his nightly notes, Dr. Karim wrote, "This structure is not static. It restores what is broken, erases what is foreign. It may not be stone as we know it, but memory, frozen and self-correcting." Before leaving that evening, he pressed his hand against the smooth wall. The surface was cool but pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, like the echo of a distant heartbeat, one still steady after 4,000 years. Voices on the recorder, audio logs from a night watch captured faint murmurs in old Egyptian phonetics. Linguists identified phrases resembling funeral rites, ones lost for over 3,000 years. The discovery came by accident. Each night, after sealing the tomb, the team left a series of environmental recorders, running devices designed to capture temperature, air density, and ambient sound. Most nights yielded only silence, the faint hum of electrical equipment, and the slow ticking of geological sensors. But on the morning of June 17th, one file refused to open properly. When technicians finally decoded it, what emerged was not static but whispering. The sound was faint, layered, and rhythmic. At first, it seemed like overlapping voices carried through air ducts, yet no ducts existed in the sealed chamber. The murmurs rose and fell in cadenced sentences formed, paused, then repeated. When filtered through spectral analysis, the waveform showed distinct phonetic structure. Every pattern matched the vocal range of a human throat, not mechanical interference. The linguists at Cairo University were called in to examine the file. After several hours, one of them froze the playback at the 38-second mark. "Listen carefully," she said. "That's a cow invocation." The words Ankempere, translated loosely as life from departure, formed part of an early Middle Kingdom funerary rite. The phrasing was archaic, predating known liturgical texts by centuries. Yet the pronunciation was precise, consistent, and unmistakably human. When compared to other recordings, the voices only appeared during nights following electromagnetic disturbances. On those nights, the tomb's ambient vibration, the constant 18 Hz hum, spiked slightly higher, as if opening a window of sound. The whispers rode within that range, too low to hear without amplification, too structured to dismiss as coincidence. What unsettled the team most was localization. The audio triangulation showed the sound didn't emanate from one place, but from the stone itself. Each wall reflected a fraction of the tone, converging in the burial hall. "It's like the chamber is speaking through resonance," said one engineer. Further analysis revealed even more peculiar details. The recordings carried harmonic overtones that matched the pitch of the resonant pillar 432 Hz. The same frequency that once made the chamber glow now seemed to shape words. The phenomenon wasn't random. It was orchestrated by the tomb's own acoustic geometry. The walls, carved with mathematical precision, acted as resonators translating vibration into audible language. In the following nights, the experiment was repeated under controlled conditions. All personnel were cleared from the site, and digital recorders were placed at equal distances throughout the hall. For 6 hours, there was silence. Then, at precisely 3:40 a.m., the sensors activated spontaneously. Once again, the murmurs began soft, steady, and deliberate. This time, they lasted longer. At the 2-minute mark, a phrase emerged with startling clarity. "Semet Ankh endures." The name carved into the tomb's inner wall returned as a living voice, echoing across 4,000 years. The tone was neither male nor female, calm yet commanding. When translated, the full phrase read, "Semet Ankh endures beneath the twin doors of balance." The following morning, the playback was analysed again. The voice had not been present in any ambient frequency below 17 Hz. It seemed to rise out of silence, manifest, and then dissolve back into it. When amplified beyond its natural range, faint secondary voices could be heard beneath the main chant. A chorus of tones weaving through, each syllable like harmonics in a chord. Dr. Karim avoided speculation, though his notes betrayed unease. "It is not speech as we understand it," he wrote. "It's vibration language born of structure. The tomb remembers how to speak." In his final entry that night, he described standing alone in the burial hall, listening through his headset as the whispers faded. Just before silence returned, a final breath passed through the static 5 syllables, barely audible, yet clear enough to transcribe. "We are still within." The sealed niche, one niche behind the main altar, required ultrasonic drills to open. Inside was a single obsidian knife wrapped in palm fibre. The blade bore no oxidation despite 4 millennia underground. The niche was small, no more than 40 centimeters wide, hidden behind a carved relief depicting 2 figures kneeling before a rising Sunday. The seam was invisible until laser scanning revealed a faint change in mineral density. When the wall section was removed, a thin layer of resin-coated dust spilled out, followed by a dry scent of oil and ash. Within, the object rested upright, deliberately positioned as if in ritual display. The obsidian was flawless. Under flashlight, it appeared to drink the light rather than reflect it, its edges sharp enough to split hair. The palm fibre wrapping crumbled on contact, yet even as it disintegrated, it released a faint aroma, resinous, sweet, almost medicinal. The fibres had been coated with beeswax and powdered copper, forming a preservative sheath that had hardened into a natural seal. Inside, the knife gleamed as if newly made. Chemical analysis confirmed it was pure volcanic glass, sourced from quarries nearly 1,000 kilometers away in what is now Ethiopia. Transporting such material to the Nile Valley 4,000 years ago would have been a logistical marvel. Yet the craftsmanship was even stranger. The blade's curvature and balance matched no known Egyptian design. It was closer in form to early Mesoamerican ceremonial knives, though separated by oceans and centuries. Under magnification, the surface showed microscopic etchings, invisible to the naked eye, lines arranged in a repeating pattern resembling waveforms. When these were converted into sound data, they produced a tone at exactly 18 Hz, the same subsonic frequency pulsing throughout the entire tomb complex. The knife, it seemed, was not merely symbolic, it was tuned. Dr. Karim hypothesized that the blade functioned as both tool and key, perhaps part of a mechanism or ritual designed to interact with the tomb's acoustic system. Its edge vibrates when the frequency passes through air, he noted. A blade that hums when the chamber breathes. When the obsidian was exposed to controlled sound waves, the team witnessed something extraordinary. At 432 Hz, the same harmonic as the resonant pillar, the knife began to emit a faint metallic ring. The tone was sustained for several seconds after the vibration ceased, as though the object held the sound inside itself. Infrared imaging revealed a brief spike in temperature along its edge, a rise of just 1 degree Celsius, but enough to prove kinetic energy transfer. The ancient tool was responding as if alive. Even stranger were the markings along its hilt. Carved into the obsidian grip was a single phrase in reversed hieroglyphs. "He who cuts the shadow." The meaning was unclear. Some linguists interpreted it as a metaphor, a reference to separation of spirit from body. Others saw it as literal, an instrument meant to divide two forms of existence. When the blade was left overnight inside its open niche, motion sensors recorded faint electromagnetic fluctuations emanating from its point pulses, occurring exactly every 40 seconds, echoing the rhythm of the tomb's recurring anomalies. By morning, the walls around the altar showed traces of fine dust that had not been there before, as though something had shifted in the stone. Dr. Karim ordered the knife encased in glass and sealed for preservation, but not before noting one final detail. Along its edge, visible only under polarized light, ran a faint smear of residue. Tests revealed traces of human hemoglobin degraded, ancient, but unmistakably real. In his field journal, beneath the data, Karim wrote a single unnumbered line: "The blade was not meant to wound flesh. It was meant to divide the unseen, to cut silence from the living air." The name of the tomb, an inscription discovered near the entrance, finally offered a title: House of the Second Dawn. Egyptologists debated its meaning, a poetic metaphor for rebirth, or a reference to celestial events. The words were etched into a slab of white limestone set beside the threshold, hidden beneath centuries of sand. The inscription was small, elegant, deliberate, each symbol cut with extraordinary precision. When translated, the phrase appeared simple enough. But the deeper the linguist studied it, the stranger it became. The hieroglyph for house used here wasn't the usual symbol for dwelling or structure. It was an archaic variant used only in association with divine enclosures, sanctuaries built not for the living, but for entities described as Neteru Aku, or radiant powers. The second term, Second Dawn, was even more peculiar. The standard Egyptian lexicon included countless words for sunrise, rebirth, and awakening. Yet the glyph combination found here appeared nowhere else. It combined two concepts: Kepa, transformation, and Aket, horizon suggesting not a renewal of the same sun, but the arrival of a different one. To some, this meant a metaphor for the afterlife. To others, it hinted at something cosmic, a celestial cycle beyond ordinary understanding. When the inscription was digitally enhanced, faint traces of pigment revealed it had once been painted in alternating bands of gold and deep blue colors, representing heaven and rebirth. The placement of the panel itself was aligned perfectly with the eastern horizon. At sunrise, the first beam of light entering the tomb struck the word second. Dr. Karim noted the coincidence with care. "This isn't symbolic alignment," he said. "It's engineered." The builders designed this monument to interact with the morning itself. Astrophysicists from the university were brought in to model the tomb's orientation. Using sky reconstruction software, They traced the direction of the entrance to an azimuth that corresponded not to the rising sun of the present era, but to its position around 2050 BCE, the date carved into the copper mirror. On that morning, the light of the rising sun would have passed directly through the entrance corridor, illuminating the burial hall's farthest wall for less than a minute. But on one specific date, the day after the equinox, the alignment shifted by half a degree, and the beam struck the mosaic floor, igniting the hourglass pattern in a blaze of refracted light. This event, later termed the Second Dawn, was not an act of chance. It occurred once every 2,160 years, a cycle corresponding to the precession of the equinox, the slow drift of Earth's axis through the heavens. Somehow, the builders of this tomb had not only understood that cycle but embedded it into their architecture. The inscription's phrase, "House of the Second Dawn," began to seem less poetic and more functional. A calendar encoded in stone, marking the moment when light would once again enter the tomb, as it had 4,000 years before. During the team's stay, the alignment came close once again. On the morning of the 21st of March, as the sun rose above the cliffs, a narrow shaft of golden light pierced through the tomb's entrance. For less than 60 seconds, it illuminated the inscription, filling the engraved letters with living brightness. Sensors across the burial hall registered a brief electromagnetic pulse, subtle, rhythmic, unmistakable. The moment passed, and the light withdrew, leaving the inscription cold and pale once more. That evening, as the camp settled, Dr. Karim stood alone before the entrance stone. In his field notes he wrote, "Perhaps it was never meant to house the dead at all. The House of the Second Dawn may be a receiver, a memory waiting for the next alignment of heaven and stone." Alignment with the stars. Astronomers noted the tomb's central axis aligned precisely with the heliacal rising of Sirius, as it appeared in 1940 BCE. It was an observation that seemed almost too precise to be coincidence. Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, had long held sacred significance to the Egyptians. Its first appearance at dawn each year heralded the annual flooding of the Nile, the event upon which all agriculture, trade, and time itself depended. Yet the alignment discovered within the House of the Second Dawn was not general or symbolic, it was absolute. The tomb's main corridor, its sloping descent, even the position of the twin sarcophagi beneath all were built on a line that intersected perfectly with the azimuth of Sirius as it rose in 1940 BCE. When laser theodolites traced the tomb's axis skyward, the path cut through the horizon at an angle, matching exactly 116.3 degrees east, the same bearing recorded in ancient star maps from the reign of Senusret I. In that era, the star was not merely a celestial object but a calendar trigger, the marker for the Egyptian New Year. Its reappearance was celebrated as the return of Isis, the moment life itself was renewed. To align a tomb so completely with that event suggested that whoever built it sought not only to preserve death, but to synchronize with rebirth on a cosmic scale. Inside the burial hall, the correlation deepened. The mirrored chamber's ceiling, long thought to be decorative, it was found to depict not random constellations, but a projection of the sky as it would have appeared on the exact morning of Sirius's heliacal rising in 1940 BCE. Every star cluster carved into the stone matched its celestial position from that date, frozen in stone as if capturing the sky's memory. When the rising of Sirius was simulated using digital light projection, something extraordinary happened. The beam struck the copper mirror at the chamber's head, scattering a pattern of reflected light across the walls. The reflections converged precisely on the hieroglyph for a Ket horizon, engraved above the entrance to the lower vault. For a moment, the entire tomb behaved like a lens, focusing celestial geometry into a single image. This precision baffled astronomers. The builders of the Middle Kingdom lacked optical instruments, yet their measurements deviated by less than 1/10 of a degree from the modern astronomical value. "This is not observational alignment," said Dr. Karim softly. "It's predictive. They built it for a sky they knew would return. Indeed, calculations showed that the same alignment would recur only once every 1,460 years, the cycle of the Sothic period, named after Sirius itself. That span marked the moment when the stars rising again coincided with the solar year, resetting Egypt's ancient calendar. The tomb's design, therefore, functioned as a kind of timekeeper, a monument calibrated not to human lifetimes, but to the rhythm of the heavens. Magnetometers confirmed faint fluctuations within the stone whenever Sirius rose above the horizon, even in modern times. The readings were subtle microvolt level changes in electromagnetic field, but consistent. It was as though the tomb still responded to the light of a star nearly 9 light-years away. Dr. Karim's team proposed that the builders may have used resonance rather than sight to determine alignment, tuning their structures to frequencies derived from star cycles. The same 18 Hz bass vibration detected throughout the site corresponded remarkably to the beat frequency produced when Sirius's orbital companion, the now known white dwarf Sirius B, completes one full revolution. Somehow, this stellar rhythm had been captured in stone. Late one night, as the sky above Luxor cleared, the team gathered outside the tomb to watch the real star rise. Just before dawn, Sirius pierced the horizon, a brilliant blue-white spark against the desert haze. For a brief moment, a shaft of light seemed to glance down the entrance corridor. Dr. Karim wrote in his log that morning, "The ancients called it the soul of Isis, the eye that returns to awaken the earth." If that is true, then perhaps this place was not a tomb at all, but a receiver waiting for her light. The antechamber of silence. Sound measurements revealed complete acoustic null zones within certain alcoves, pockets where even a whisper vanished. The discovery was made almost by accident. While conducting routine resonance tests, one of the technicians noticed something strange in specific corners of the antechamber. Sound simply stopped. When he spoke, his own voice collapsed mid-sentence, as though swallowed by the air. Clapping or tapping a tool produced no echo, no decay, nothing. The sound didn't fade, it ceased. Instruments confirmed it. In those alcoves, decibel levels dropped to absolute zero. At first, the team assumed equipment failure. But when mechanical meters and analog sensors were used instead of digital ones, the results were the same. The null zones measured roughly 1 meter wide and half a meter deep, evenly spaced along the chamber's perimeter. Each was shaped like a shallow recess, carved directly into the limestone. The surfaces were perfectly smooth, no tool marks, no signs of plaster or acoustic dampening material. Yet they devoured sound as if they were openings into a vacuum. The team called them silent alcoves. When mapped in 3D, their arrangement formed a ring around the chamber, a precise 12-sided geometry corresponding to the dodecagonal pattern etched faintly into the floor. Every angle was equal, every alcove perfectly positioned to divide the circular space into harmonic intervals. Dr. Karim theorized that they served a deliberate acoustic function, not to amplify sound, as in most temples, but to absorb it completely. To test the theory, a continuous tone was played through a low-frequency generator. As the sound waves filled the chamber, the air seemed to vibrate until, one by one, the alcoves began to consume the tone. Within seconds, the entire sound field collapsed inward, leaving behind a stillness so profound it pressed against the skin. Instruments showed the air pressure inside the chamber had dropped minutely, as if energy itself had been drained from the space. The readings made no sense. For sound to cancel so completely, every reflection must meet its opposite phase perfectly, an acoustic balance that even modern technology struggles to achieve. Yet here it occurred naturally, with no active machinery, no digital control. "It's as if the room knows how to erase its own voice," said one acoustician. When the experiment ended, the silence lingered longer than it should have a residual vacuum, an absence that took nearly 30 seconds to refill with ambient noise. During that interval, several team members reported a physical sensation of pressure behind their eyes, like standing inside a thundercloud. One later described hearing a low hum that wasn't sound at all, but vibration inside the bones. Subsequent analysis revealed that the null zones aligned perfectly with the tomb's magnetic map, each positioned at a node where the local electromagnetic field dipped slightly. It was as though the stone itself had been tuned not just acoustically, but electrically, to create regions of pure equilibrium points where vibration, frequency, and energy all met and cancelled each other out. The phenomenon could not be replicated outside the tomb. When models were constructed from laser scans, the effect vanished entirely. Even the same limestone, quarried from identical strata, produced no result. One night, a young archaeologist stood inside one of the silent alcoves alone, holding a recorder. When she played it back later, no sound registered, not even the static of the microphone. But just before the file ended, a faint pulse appeared. Barely audible, a single tone lasting exactly 40 seconds, then cutting off abruptly. Its frequency measured precisely 18 Hz. Dr. Karim listened to it several times before turning off the device. In his notes he wrote, "The tomb does not echo. It listens. These alcoves are not empty. They are ears." Hieroglyphs that shifted colour. Pigments on one relief changed hue under different lighting from red ochre to deep green. Spectrography detected photoreactive compounds never found in other ancient paints. The anomaly was first noticed by a photographer cataloguing the wall inscriptions near the tomb's central corridor. In daylight spectrum, the hieroglyphs glowed a warm reddish brown. Under the cooler tones of artificial LED light, they appeared deep green, almost metallic. At first, he assumed a white balance error, but multiple cameras confirmed it. The pigments themselves were changing colour in real time. The relief depicted a procession, 7 figures walking toward a rising sun, carrying objects resembling bowls or mirrors. When researchers illuminated the surface with ultraviolet light, the pigments fluoresced faintly, not randomly, but in bands, as though responding to frequency rather than brightness. Each hue corresponded to a narrow wavelength of light, shifting predictably as illumination changed. When the pigment was analysed, the results shocked the materials team. It contained traces of copper oxides and malachite, as expected, but also compounds unknown to ancient Egypt. Among them was a crystalline lattice resembling modern photoreactive titanium dioxide, a material that reacts to light by altering its molecular alignment. The crystalline structure had somehow survived intact for 4 millennia. Under microscopic observation, the pigment seemed to shimmer microscopically, as if each grain tilted toward or away from light like tiny mirrors. The team concluded that the builders of the House of the Second Dawn had engineered a paint that was, in essence, alive, responsive to light, capable of shifting colour through structural, not chemical, change. Yet that discovery raised a deeper question. How did a civilization without optics or nanotechnology create such a material? Further scans revealed that the colour shift wasn't uniform. The hues changed only across specific glyphs, those spelling the word Aku, meaning luminous being. When red, the symbols glowed faintly under near-infrared light. When green, they reflected near-ultraviolet. The shift acted like a binary code, alternating between visible and invisible wavelengths. When recorded over time, the colour changes followed a pattern that repeated every 40 minutes again, aligning with the tomb's recurring time signature. As researchers mapped the entire relief, they realized the color-changing hieroglyphs formed a message within the message. Each hue shift corresponded to a rhythmic sequence, a pulse. When translated numerically, the alternating colors created a ratio 1.618, the golden section. The same constant embedded throughout the tomb's geometry, star alignment, and sound frequencies. One night, During a controlled light experiment, Dr. Karim stood before the wall as it shifted again. Under the cool glow of the projectors, the red faded entirely, replaced by deep emerald streaks that rippled across the carvings like water. The chamber's air temperature dropped slightly, and the sensors picked up a faint electromagnetic surge. The pigment's atomic bonds, it seemed, were responding to more than light. They were reacting to the tomb's unseen rhythm. When the lighting returned to normal, the red hue reappeared but altered. The outlines of the hieroglyphs seemed sharper, as though they had been recarved overnight. Yet no dust, no debris, no sign of disturbance was found. The wall had rewritten itself in silence. Spectrographic data later revealed a final twist. Hidden beneath the visible layer of paint was another inscription, faint but legible when illuminated with near-infrared. It read, "He who walks in light will see the green path." The phrase matched one found only in the pyramid texts, describing the soul's passage through the sky at dawn. Dr. Karim stared at the image in silence for a long time. In his journal, he wrote, "They painted not with colour, but with frequency." The wall is not depicting light, it is made to remember it. The offering that never decayed. In a side chamber lay a bowl of dried dates, intact and fragrant. Carbon dating confirmed they were 3,800 years old. No mould, no insects preservation without resin or salt. The bowl sat on a low pedestal carved directly into the limestone, perfectly level and untouched by dust. The air in the small room was still, dense, and faintly sweet, the aroma of fruit long removed from time. Each date retained its shape, skin unbroken, surface smooth and supple as though dried only months before. Organic matter should not survive millennia without chemical protection, yet here it was, soft, aromatic, alive in scent. The vessel itself was made of faience, glazed with faint traces of cobalt blue. It bore no inscriptions, no dedications to a deity or royal name. The placement of the bowl, however, was deliberate. It rested beneath a shallow dome carved into the ceiling, directly aligned with a vertical shaft that reached the surface. At noon, a narrow beam of sunlight passed through that shaft and struck the bowl precisely, as if meant to awaken it daily. When samples were taken for analysis, the results defied explanation. The cellular structure of the dates showed no bacterial degradation, no fungal intrusion, and no crystallization of sugars processes that should have occurred thousands of years ago. Even more remarkably, the isotopic ratios within the fruit had shifted slightly, suggesting a microenvironment unlike any natural atmosphere. The air around the bowl had a reduced oxygen level and a trace concentration of mercury vapor, the same element found in the lower chambers. It seemed that the tomb's internal chemistry had created an environment capable of halting decay. Chemical mapping revealed faint electromagnetic activity surrounding the bowl, a measurable field pulsing gently at 18 Hz. The readings were subtle but consistent, forming a circular halo less than half a meter wide. It was as though the bowl sat within an invisible barrier, a bubble of stabilized energy. Inside that field, the temperature remained constant to the 10th of a degree, even when the surrounding air fluctuated. As the investigation deepened, another layer of mystery emerged. When infrared cameras recorded the chamber over several hours, the fruit's surface reflected intermittent points of heat, tiny flares that appeared and vanished rhythmically. Each flare coincided with the same 40-second interval that defined the tomb's recurring pulse. The bowl, like every other object within this monument, was part of a synchronized system. Ancient texts speak of offerings made to feed the ka, the vital essence that survives death. Food was left not for sustenance but for resonance to maintain the soul's connection to the world of the living. Dr. Karim began to suspect that these dates were more than symbolic offerings. They were designed to last, he wrote, because the ritual they served never ended. When one fruit was gently sliced for microscopic study, the flesh beneath the skin was firm and faintly luminous under ultraviolet light. The sugars had polymerized into a crystalline lattice, a natural preservative, yet no residue of modern contaminants existed. The chemical balance was self-sustaining. Somehow, this chamber preserved life through equilibrium rather than embalming. Late one evening, after the experiments concluded, one of the researchers reported hearing a faint buzzing near the pedestal. At first it seemed like interference from nearby equipment, but when the instruments were shut off, the sound persisted, a barely audible vibration emanating from the bowl itself. It was continuous, low, and perfectly pitched at 432 Hz. Dr. Karim ordered immediate cessation of handling. The bowl was recovered with glass and sealed. "We disturb what remembers," he said quietly, "and this remembers perfectly." In his final notes that night, he reflected on the nature of the find. Decay is not an enemy here, it is absence. These offerings were never meant to die because they were never made for the living. Chapter 31, The Written Curse. Carved on the sarcophagus lid's underside were words warning, "He who breaks the nightstone will awaken the sleepers." Scholars noted the syntax predated known Egyptian grammar. The inscription was discovered only after the basalt lid had been raised invisible for the 4,000 years it had rested against the tomb's floor. The carving was shallow but deliberate, its grooves crisp as though freshly cut. Each hieroglyph deviated from the standard Old Kingdom forms, their structure closer to the proto-symbolic writing used in Egypt's earliest dynasties. To linguists, it was as if the phrase belonged to a language halfway between picture and speech. A warning written before writing itself had settled. The phrase's meaning was clear enough. He who breaks the nightstone will awaken the sleepers. But who were the sleepers? Egyptologists disagreed. Some interpreted it as a poetic reference to the dead. Others suspected something more literal, a title for those entombed deliberately, as if their rest served a purpose beyond burial. When the carving was photographed under a bleak light, faint residues of blue pigment appeared in the grooves. The pigment contained traces of copper and cobalt, the same compounds found in the photoreactive hieroglyphs deeper in the tomb. When illuminated with alternating wavelengths, the color of the inscription shifted subtly, first deepening, then fading entirely before reappearing. The words seemed to flicker, like a message meant to activate under certain light. Linguistic reconstruction revealed another peculiarity. The syntax implied time reversal. In modern translation, it read not as a future threat, but as a conditional echo. He who has broken the nightstone has awakened the sleepers. The warning was written as though the act had already occurred. The sarcophagus itself, known as the nightstone in later records, was carved from a single block of black basalt. Under acoustic testing, it resonated faintly 18 Hz, the tomb's constant signature. The same vibration that rippled through the copper mirror and hourglass mosaic pulsed here, trapped within the stone. Some believed the curse referred not to supernatural punishment, but to disruption of this harmonic seal. When Dr. Karim first read the translation aloud, the recording equipment malfunctioned. The waveform matched the resonance of the sarcophagus itself. "It's not just an inscription," he murmured afterward. "It's a trigger, a message written in sound." The phrase lingered in his notes for days, rewritten again and again in translation attempts. Each version altered subtly, as though the syntax resisted final definition. Breaks became unseals. Nightstone shifted to gate. And sleepers, sometimes dreamers, sometimes listeners. In his final journal entry for that week, Dr. Karim wrote, "Perhaps they are not asleep in death, but in waiting, bound by silence, sustained by frequency." The warning isn't for us, it's for the tomb itself. The scientist who refused to return. After cataloguing the artifacts, one field researcher resigned, citing persistent auditory phenomena. He never spoke publicly again, though his journal hinted at dreams of corridors repeating endlessly. His name was Dr. Elias Farouk, a junior acoustics specialist assigned to monitor the sound data inside the burial halls. By all accounts, he was methodical, rational, and unshaken by the site's growing list of anomalies. But after the night of the second blackout, his demeanor changed. He worked silently, avoided conversation, and began refusing to enter the deeper chambers alone. The others thought it was exhaustion. Archaeological digs are long, and nerves wear thin, but within a week, he handed in his resignation and left the desert without a word. What little is known of his experience comes from the journal he left behind a notebook found months later in the camp's abandoned office. Its pages were mostly routine observations, temperature readings, vibration data, calibration notes. But near the end, his writing grew erratic. "The hum is constant," one entry read. "Even when I leave the site, I hear it behind walls, under speech, between heartbeats. This is Roll." He described standing in the passage between the mirrored chamber and the basalt vault, listening through a stethoscope pressed to the wall. Then, gradually, it shifted, resolving into patterns. Voices, perhaps, or something that imitated them. "It sounds like movement," he wrote, "as if the stone is breathing inward." For several nights after that, his sleep deteriorated. His later entries became fragmented, written in uneven lines. "The corridors turn back on themselves. Every path returns to where I began. The floor feels different underfoot each time. There is no end." When his colleagues read the journal later, they dismissed the last pages as exhaustion-induced delusion, the result of overwork and constant exposure to low-frequency sound. But one passage stood out. It was dated 2 nights before he left the site. I followed the hum into the main passage at 2:13 a.m. It grew louder near the sealed door. The walls seemed to bend slightly, not visibly but perceptibly. When I turned back, I realized I'd walked farther than the corridor should allow. The air was colder, yet I'd taken no more than 20 steps. He claimed the sound became directional, pulling him forward until it reached a low, almost human whisper, repeating the same word: return. The next day, he packed his belongings and left Luxor entirely. He declined further contact with the research team, returning to his home in Alexandria, where he withdrew from public life. His university file listed medical leave for auditory fatigue, but there were no subsequent publications, no lectures, no communications. Months later, a parcel arrived at Dr. Karim's office, a small box containing a single cassette tape and a note in Farouk's handwriting. It recorded itself. The tape, when played, was almost silent except for faint static. But at precisely 40 seconds in, a low pulse emerged identical to the 18 Hz vibration that haunted the tomb. Dr. Karim listened only once before locking it away. In his field notes, he wrote quietly beneath the date, "He heard what the stone remembers. Some things do not stop calling once you've heard them." The DNA that didn't belong. Genetic sequencing of bone dust revealed mitochondrial markers unrelated to known Egyptian or Near Eastern populations. The anomaly remains under peer review. The discovery was made during routine analysis of the powdery residue found inside the basalt sarcophagus. The same mixture of ash, gold leaf, and bone fragments thought to represent multiple individuals. The sample was small, almost weightless, yet its genetic profile would challenge everything the team thought they understood about ancient lineage. At first, the results seemed contaminated. The sequencing lab in Cairo reported unfamiliar markers, strands that failed to match any mitochondrial database for human ancestry in North Africa, Mesopotamia, or even sub-Saharan Africa. These weren't mutations nor errors of degradation. The genetic structure itself was coherent, intact, but it diverged at key points in the human phylogenetic tree. "It looks human," one technician said. "But it isn't from here, not from this region, maybe not even from this branch. This is prior." When cross-referenced with the world's ancient genome archives, The sample showed faint correlation with populations found thousands of kilometers away, the highland tribes of the Caucasus, even fragments resembling prehistoric samples from Central Asia. It was as though the genetic code represented a synthesis of multiple ancient lineages that should never have met. Dr. Karim's notes grew increasingly cautious. He refused to publish the results outright, fearing misinterpretation. Or a deliberate hybridization, genetic preservation through ritualized recombination. That idea, though speculative, was not impossible. The Egyptians were known to intermix symbolic and physical forms of resurrection. Perhaps, he thought, this tomb had preserved that idea literally. Further testing revealed even stranger data. Certain sequences within the mitochondrial genome exhibited self-repair properties, the ability to correct damaged nucleotides under specific light frequencies. This was not ordinary mutation resilience. It was a kind of biological feedback loop. When exposed to infrared light matching 740 nanometers, the same wavelength reflected by the copper mirror, the degraded DNA strands showed partial reformation. They were reacting to light as though it were part of their environment, as if built to remember it. No known organism, ancient or modern, displays this exact behavior. When the findings were repeated, the same regeneration occurred. The sample was later sealed in a light-proof container, where it remained inert, silent, lifeless, until the red laser of a spectrometer touched it again. The pattern re-emerged instantly. The implications were staggering. If genuine, it suggested an ancient biotechnological understanding, or at least an observation of light's preservation effects far ahead of recorded knowledge. Yet the tomb's inscription, House of the Second Dawn, suddenly took on new meaning. Rebirth might not have been a metaphor for spiritual return, but a literal restoration of life through vibration, through frequency, through light. One geneticist, reviewing the data privately, remarked that the sequence contained faint similarities to early hominid DNA, not identical, but adjacent, as though belonging to a lineage that diverged before modern humans fully formed. "We are not looking at something foreign," she said. "We're looking at something that never continued." In his final annotation, Dr. Karim wrote only a single haunting line. Perhaps they were not preserving death at all, but attempting to restart something that once was. The symbols of the horizon. On the tomb's final wall was a mural showing the sun divided into two halves, one golden, one black, separated by figures walking both directions. Interpreters called it the Passage of Two Suns. It stood at the farthest reach of the burial complex, a wall untouched since the chamber was first sealed. The mural dominated the space, its pigments remarkably vivid after nearly 4 millennia. The gold shone as if newly applied, and the black half of the sun absorbed light like obsidian. The figures between the two halves were arranged in perfect symmetry, 7 walking toward dawn, 7 toward night. None bore royal crowns or divine emblems. They were human, anonymous, caught forever between light and shadow. Egyptologists immediately recognized the imagery as cosmological, the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. But there was something unusual in its construction. The division of the sun was not linear. Instead, the boundary between gold and black curved subtly, forming an arc, a crescent-shaped rift that matched the angle of the horizon on the morning of Sirius's rising. In astronomical terms, it represented not day and night, but 2 suns at different phases of ascent. Infrared scanning revealed hidden details beneath the visible paint. Faint outlines of a second set of symbols were carved directly into the plaster, geometric spirals and parallel lines, almost mathematical in precision. When digitally enhanced, these subsurface markings formed a pattern corresponding to the path of precessional drift. Earth's slow axial wobble over thousands of years. Somehow, the mural encoded the movement of the heavens themselves. At the mural's base ran a line of hieroglyphs, partly eroded but still decipherable. The translation read, "When the first sun falls, the second shall rise through stone." To scholars, this phrase was deeply ambiguous. Was it a reference to the afterlife, or to something more literal, a celestial event, a cosmic alignment? The dating of the pigment, around 1940 BCE, corresponded precisely to Egypt's last recorded calendar reset, the Sothic rising of Sirius that realigned the nation's sense of time. The House of the Second Dawn seemed built for that exact moment. When the mural was illuminated with polarized light, another phenomenon appeared. The gold half glowed faintly at certain frequencies, while the black absorbed and released heat in pulsing intervals. The rhythm matched the tomb's now familiar 18 Hz vibration, the frequency that connected every chamber, every anomaly. The mural wasn't passive decoration, it was responsive, alive to resonance. Standing before it, Dr. Karim noted that the figures walking toward light and darkness were identical in every detail, yet mirrored the same individuals reflected in opposite directions. "They're not two groups," he said quietly. "They're the same travelers." That night, a final test was performed. When a soft tone at 432 Hz filled the chamber, the gold pigment began to shimmer, while the black deepened into a void-like matte. For a few seconds, the mural appeared to shift the border between the two suns, blurring, merging, until they seemed one continuous sphere, whole again. Then the effect faded, leaving only stillness. In his last entry for that section of excavation, Dr. Karim wrote, "The passage of two suns, not death and rebirth, but transition between cycles. A memory carved for the sky, not for man. The tomb may not record history, it may be waiting for the next horizon." The day the sand returned. Weeks after completion, a desert storm buried the site's entrance completely. When cleared, the corridor was filled again with compacted dust, as if deliberately sealed by nature. It happened suddenly, without warning. The excavation had officially concluded, the artifacts catalogued and sealed for study, and most of the team had already departed. Only a small maintenance crew remained to finalize documentation. That night, the wind began soft at first, then rising to a roar that swallowed every sound across the valley. The sky turned the color of bronze. Instruments at the camp recorded gusts exceeding 110 kilometers per hour. Then, as quickly as it had come, the storm ended. When morning came, the site was gone. The dunes had shifted overnight, consuming everything in a single sweep. The scaffolding, the cables, the entrance stair, all vanished beneath meters of compacted sand. The valley that had been bustling with light and noise now looked untouched, as though no one had ever set foot there. Excavation crews returned to reopen the passage. It took nearly 2 days to reach the first carved stones of the entryway, but what they found stopped them cold. The outer platform where the limestone inscription, "House of the Second Dawn," had once been visible, was now sealed under a solid layer of sediment, fused as if by pressure rather than mere accumulation. When the main corridor was finally uncovered, the entrance was filled tight with compacted dust, pressed so densely it had become almost solid rock. What baffled engineers most was the pattern within the sand. Grain alignment analysis showed stratified layering, alternating bands of coarse and fine particles arranged in uniform waves, as though the material had been drawn inward rather than blown in. The airflow models made no sense. "It's as if the storm moved into the tomb, not over it," one geologist said. Dr. Karim ordered the corridor cleared carefully, fearing collapse. But even after repeated excavation, the sand returned. Within 48 hours, The same passage refilled itself with fine sediment, again packed beyond natural density. There were no wind events, no storms, only still air. The tomb seemed intent on closing. Samples of the dust revealed microscopic shards of magnetite and quartz, identical to those embedded in the hourglass mosaic. When exposed to vibration at 18 Hz, the particles aligned into intricate patterns, forming rings and spirals identical to those carved throughout the chambers. It was as if the sand itself remembered where it belonged, drawn back by resonance, sealing the threshold once more. After the third refilling, work ceased. "Nature is reclaiming what we disturbed," Karim said quietly. The government declared the site restricted, citing safety concerns. Within weeks, all access was officially suspended. Months later, satellite imaging showed the dunes had smoothed completely. No trace of excavation remained, only an unbroken expanse of desert, where the House of the Second Dawn once opened to the world. In his last recorded entry, Dr. Karim wrote from Cairo, "Perhaps the tomb was never meant to be rediscovered. It opens for its cycle, receives the light of one dawn, then closes until the next. We did not find it. It allowed itself to be found. The missing data files. In 2024, researchers reported that 2 terabytes of digital scan data vanished from secure servers. Backups showed file corruption localized only to the tomb's magnetic survey set. At first, it looked like a simple technical fault, a server sync error. Perhaps a power interruption during upload, but as the team examined the logs, the pattern defied every protocol safeguard. Every file related to the tomb's magnetic mapping field strength readings, flux models, even raw signal captures had not merely been deleted. They had rewritten themselves. The file names were intact, the metadata unchanged, but each opened as blank code zeros filling the entire structure, like a wiped drive that had never held information. The loss was significant. Those readings held the only complete record of how the tomb's electromagnetic field behaved over time, the pulse that seemed to unify all its anomalies. Without that data, much of the research could not be verified. Yet the corruption was confined precisely to those scans. Every other dataset, acoustic, geological, chemical, remained untouched. Cybersecurity experts were called in to investigate. Their conclusion was unnerving. The wipe hadn't come from external access or malware. It had occurred locally, triggered by an internal process on the server at 3:40 a.m. The exact minute that, 2 years earlier, the chamber's resonance spike had been recorded during the blackout incident. When technicians opened the physical storage drives, the magnetic platters showed irregular alignment. The domains within the metal had rearranged into spiraling patterns, a fractal-like geometry identical to those carved on the tomb's walls. "This isn't corruption," one analyst said. "It's rewriting like the drive recorded something else." Attempts to recover fragments revealed faint anomalies in the binary structure, repeating numerical sequences embedded deep within the wiped data. The numbers weren't random. When converted into frequency values, they matched the tomb's 18 Hz resonance. It was as if the tomb's signal had imprinted itself onto the hardware and overwritten the files from within. The team tried to reconstruct the data using mirrored backups stored off-site. Strangely, those copies also failed. Each backup became corrupted the moment it was connected to the network containing the original file tree, as though the data loss were contagious. The corruption propagated silently, spreading to isolated systems without direct transfer. No known computer virus could behave this way. One researcher described the event as a digital echo. Another compared it to resonance between frequencies, when 2 signals align and cancel each other out. Maybe the tomb's data and our storage medium shared a harmonic, she speculated. When that alignment peaked, one erased the other. 3 weeks later, a final audit uncovered something stranger still. On one of the offline drives, buried deep in the binary void where the deleted data had been, a single text fragment remained undetected, until checksum analysis exposed it. When decoded from ASCII, it formed 3 words. "It remembers us." Dr. Karim refused to comment publicly on the discovery. In his private notes, he wrote only this line: "Information behaves like energy. Once it meets its resonance, it returns to silence." The return of Semet Ankh. A year later, an artifact dealer in Cairo presented a small limestone shard for sale. It bore the same name as the tomb's architect carved newly. With modern tools, at first glance, the fragment seemed ordinary. A palm-sized piece of limestone, etched with 4 simple hieroglyphs: the reed, the folded cloth, the half-circle, and the symbol for life. Together, they formed Semet Ankh, the name discovered deep within the sealed chamber. But this carving was no relic of antiquity. The dealer, a man known for handling both legitimate and grey market antiquities, admitted it had come to him only weeks earlier from an anonymous source claiming to have recovered it from the desert wind. To the untrained eye, it might have been a clever forgery. The chisel work was too precise, the edges too clean. Yet the material itself told another story. Under analysis, the shard's surface showed a patina consistent with thousands of years of desert exposure, fine silica deposits embedded in microfractures, impossible to reproduce artificially. Even stranger, carbon dating of the limestone's outer layer matched the same geologic formation as the tomb itself. When word reached Dr. Karim, he travelled to Cairo to see it for himself. The moment he lifted the shard under lamplight, the carved letters seemed to shimmer faintly, as if etched in 2 different depths. One visible, one only perceptible in shadow. Under angled illumination, fine striations appeared along the surface, forming a subtle spiral around the name. The pattern was identical to the harmonic grooves that lined the copper mirror within the House of the Second Dawn. Spectral scans added yet another layer of mystery. Traces of modern steel residue were found within the grooves, evidence of a recent tool, but beneath that, embedded in the stone's matrix, lay microscopic flecks of ancient pigment, the same blue-green compound used inside the tomb. Photoreactive under ultraviolet light. The stone seemed to hold both ages at once, one ancient, one new, merged as if the act of carving had awakened something dormant within it. When the name Semet Ankh was spoken aloud in the lab during testing, an odd interference appeared in the audio equipment, a faint hum at 18 Hz, echoing the tomb's persistent frequency. The sound faded when the shard was covered. "It's responding," one technician whispered. To its own name, the inscription's translation still carried the epithet found within the burial chamber. "He who closed the door." It was this phrase that unsettled Karim most. "Why carve it again?" he asked. "And why now?" Authorities later traced the artifact's sale attempt to a series of anonymous emails sent from a public network near Luxor, the same coordinates as the buried site, which by then lay sealed beneath desert sand. No suspect was identified. In his final report, Dr. Karim declined to classify the shard as counterfeit. Instead, he filed it under temporal anomaly, unverified origin. Privately, he added one final note to his journal: Semet Ankh closed the door once. Perhaps his work was never meant to end. When his name returns, it means the door remembers the resealing ceremony. By 2025, the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities ordered the site resealed, citing environmental instability. Workers replaced the plug with reinforced concrete, restoring silence to the valley. It was not an ordinary closure. No cameras, no journalists, and no public statements beyond a single press release. The excavation that had once promised to redefine Middle Kingdom archaeology was now to be buried once again. Only a handful of officials and engineers were present when the order was carried out, their work conducted in silence beneath the relentless desert Sunday. The entrance, once a doorway to discovery, now looked like nothing more than a shallow depression in the sand, soon to vanish beneath the shifting dunes. The resealing process began at dawn. Teams arrived with trucks carrying limestone dust, gravel, and concrete, accompanied by guards to ensure no unauthorized documentation took place. The old plug, the same type of seamless barrier the ancients had placed 4,000 years earlier, was mimicked as closely as modern engineering could manage. The concrete mixture contained pulverized basalt and silicate, matching the tomb's original composition. "We're closing a door," one worker said quietly. Not just filling a hole. Before the final pour, a small delegation of scientists, including Dr. Karim, was permitted a brief visit to the antechamber. They took no samples, no photographs, only measurements, and a last round of instrument readings. For 40 minutes, the monitors registered faint but persistent vibrations beneath the floor. The same 18 Hz frequency, the heartbeat of the tomb, still pulsed deep within. Then, as the team prepared to leave, the signal faded. "It stopped," whispered one technician, "like it knows." By midday, the plug was sealed, layer by layer, until the last trace of the passage disappeared. The desert wind began its slow work, erasing footprints as if aiding the closure. Workers reported that the air grew strangely cool near the site, a chill that lingered long after sunset. When the final equipment truck departed, the temperature sensors installed nearby and registered one last fluctuation. A brief drop of 6 degrees Celsius lasting exactly 40 seconds. The ministry's official reasoning cited environmental risk fears of structural collapse or mercury exposure. The tomb had shown too much resistance to remaining open. Instruments failed, data vanished, and sand returned on its own accord. "We didn't close it," said one archaeologist. "It closed itself. We only followed its lead." 2 days later, the site was declared restricted under national preservation law. GPS coordinates were redacted from public databases, and satellite imagery was digitally blurred at the request of the ministry. The location of the House of the Second Dawn was once again lost, buried beneath the very sands it had emerged from. That evening, Dr. Karim wrote his final journal entry. The tone was neither mournful nor defiant, but resigned, almost reverent. "We came to awaken memory, but memory prefers silence. Some monuments are not meant to stay open. They are lungs, they breathe once every age, then rest until the next dawn. The tomb that waits again. Today, the location is unmarked on tourist maps. Satellite images show only sand, unbroken and pale. Beneath it, a structure sleeps once more, a memory sealed against time, waiting for its next discovery. The desert has reclaimed what humanity briefly disturbed. From above, there is no sign that the House of the Second Dawn ever existed. No excavation scars, no tire tracks, not even the faint outlines of the dig site. Wind and gravity have done their quiet work, sculpting the dunes into the same patterns they wore for millennia. Only the experts who once stood within those chambers could sense the weight of what lies below a geometry of silence, a heartbeat hidden in stone. Occasionally, reconnaissance satellites capture faint anomalies, temperature irregularities beneath the surface, or symmetrical ripples in the sand that appear, then vanish within days. The data never remains stable. Each time scientists attempt to confirm the readings, the coordinates shift slightly, as if the land itself erases the evidence. "It doesn't want to be seen," Dr. Karim once said. "It only reveals itself to the right moment." Locals in nearby villages still speak of the storm that sealed the valley. Some describe it as natural, others as divine. Bedouin guides refuse to camp within several kilometers of the site. They call it Al-Bayt al-Samit, the silent house. At night, they claim, the wind carries a tone low and steady, like a song hummed by the earth. Travelers who have listened closely describe feeling it in their chest rather than hearing it with their ears. Scientists dismiss these tales as desert acoustics, but those who once worked the site do not. They know the frequency well. 18 Hz. Dr. Karim himself vanished from public life after the resealing. He declined all interviews and withdrew from university research, leaving behind only a single lecture manuscript titled Resonance and Memory in Stone, unpublished at the time of his death. In it, one line stands out: "Some architectures are not built to last, they are built to wait." Today, the tomb lies beyond reach, protected by its own silence and by bureaucratic red tape. Researchers who have tried to locate it again find themselves entangled in closed archives and missing records. The site number assigned by the Ministry of Antiquities no longer exists. It has been erased, not destroyed, folded back into the continuum of sand and time. Yet the story endures. Each year, a few scholars revisit the surviving notes, the incomplete data files, and the scattered fragments of the project. They trace the evidence like a constellation half remembered, each star a clue that refuses to stay fixed. The tomb's legend grows quietly, retold in academic whispers, in late-night documentaries, in the curious hum beneath Cairo's libraries when the power flickers. And somewhere beneath the desert, under layers of wind and memory, the tomb itself rests intact, patient and listening. The hourglass mosaic waits for its next alignment. The resonance slumbers beneath its basalt heart. When the second dawn returns, whether in another century or another age, it will awaken again, just as it always has. The first breath of dust. When the plug finally broke, a sigh of ancient air rolled outward. It carried the bitter trace of resin and linen. Cameras fogged. The excavation lights dimmed under the pressure change, and for a moment, even the desert seemed to hold its breath. That was the first true moment of contact when time itself seemed to shift, and the world of the living met the air of the dead. The archaeologists had prepared for months, expecting nothing more than a stale pocket of air sealed by stone. But as the crack widened, the reaction was not passive. It was as if the tomb exhaled deliberately, releasing what it had guarded for 4,000 years. The sound, low, almost imperceptible, echoed faintly through the corridor, a tone more felt than heard. Inside, dust billowed like smoke, glittering under the floodlights. Each particle hung suspended longer than it should, drifting in slow motion before settling again onto the floor. The scent was unmistakable old oils, bitumen, and something faintly metallic. The pressure sensors on the wall registered a minor drop, followed by an unexpected inversion. Air wasn't just escaping, some of it seemed to be drawn back in. Technicians checked for equipment failure, but the readings held. "It's equalizing," one murmured. Yet the term felt inadequate. Equalization suggested balance, this felt more like communication, a reaction to intrusion. The cameras captured the fog, condensing briefly into faint spirals before fading. Later, slow-motion analysis revealed the swirl patterns aligned perfectly with the spiral carvings found on the inner lintel. Coincidence, perhaps, but unsettling nonetheless. As the air cleared, the entrance chamber revealed itself in fragments, the outline of walls, the faint shimmer of gold in the dust, and the first glimpse of hieroglyphs no human eyes had seen since the Middle Kingdom. The silence afterward was total. No wind, no insects, no sound from the desert beyond. Even the hum of the generators seemed distant, muffled, as though the very air had thickened. It took nearly an hour for conditions to stabilize enough for entry. Every movement stirred faint currents of air that whispered softly across the microphones, forming random phonetic bursts, fragments that, when played back later, resembled speech. Linguists dismissed it as pareidolia, the brain imposing order on noise. But those who listened closely swore they heard a single repeating syllable, Ankh. When Dr. Kerim finally stepped through the threshold, he paused. The beam of his headlamp illuminated fine streaks on the wall marks that hadn't been visible before the air moved. They looked like fingerprints pressed into the dust, leading deeper inside. No one had touched that surface yet. "Air doesn't do this," one of the workers said quietly. By the end of the day, the team had logged every measurement, every fluctuation. But in Karim's private notebook, he wrote something the official report omitted. It breathed. The tomb inhaled and exhaled, as though it recognized the return of light. In later weeks, he would refer to this moment simply as the first breath, not of discovery, but of awakening. Because from that instant on, nothing within the tomb remained still.